so excited. Thank you, Hillary, for hosting, and thank you, Dithu, for coming. This is awesome.
Hey, Greg. I'm so glad you're here.
Oh my God, I've just been like, oh, let it begin. Let it begin. Where's my rhino ball?
I feel you. We're gonna get started here soon. I'm just waiting for Dithu now, I think. I don't see him on here yet.
Yeah, no worries. I just couldn't contain myself. So,
that's great.
Oh, this is like so exciting.
Finally, we've been talking about it for a while.
Yeah, I know. I have goosebumps. Actually, I'm like so into fandom right now. It's like you do, right?
That's how I felt emailing back and forth with Dithu this week. It's been pretty cool.
Totally. I saw the response from the New York ABBA conference, and I was like, oh, why did I miss that? That would have been amazing. I mean, so many people were like, this was the highlight.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine that. That's like gourd popping amazing. Like everyone's winter squash should be going.
Super great.
Sorry,
I love it. I love your enthusiasm.
This is, well, it's life-changing for everyone involved.
I'm going to talk about that.
Oh, I'm sure. This is so beautiful. All right, I'm going to be quiet, though. I'm distracting.
You're good.
Oh, and I'm going to turn off my camera just so the bandwidth is good.
Oh, okay. Bye. There's so many people. Hey, Eric.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm sorry. I was trying to grab some dinner while this was all getting going.
Yep, I feel that.
I got home 15 minutes ago, and I'm like, all right, let me try to stuff some food in my mouth. But I'm psyched about this. It should be a great presentation.
Yeah. Hey, Dithu?
Hi, Hillary. Hi, everyone.
Welcome.
What's up, dude?
Hey, Eric.
How are you?
Oh, I'm doing well.
Good. Fresh off your nice ABBA presentation.
Yes, that's
right.
Right.
Into the hangout.
Exactly in the same spot that I was a week ago.
How about that? Not as finely dressed, dude. You were looking sharp that day.
Oh, thank you very much, Eric. Yeah, welcome. You know, that literally blew the dust off of a suit because it's quarantine and there's no need for that if you're working from home. But
I work from home every day and I wear this suit. I don't know what you're talking about.
We don't all have that kind of hustle, Dr. J. So.
Well, I think we should get started. So I timed myself because I know a lot of people have tons of questions for you, Dithu. So I timed myself and I talk very fast. I'm going to try to slow down, but it was like 16 minutes total to get through my slides. So we left lots of time for questions. So be prepared.
I'm so happy. I'm so excited. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really honored to be here. This is like such a cool group. I would hesitate to call myself a lurker because that's very creepy, but I am obviously present in the BCBAs using the ISCA group, but maybe I don't contribute as much as I should. So it's really nice to be here with this awesome community.
Well, this is plenty contribution. We're very happy to have you. All right, I'm going to get us started. So I'm super excited to welcome everyone today. We're going to talk about enhanced choice, which is really cool because it's been a really hot topic lately. I'm Hillary Laney. I'm a BCBA in the Northwest of Washington State on the West Coast. I've been doing skill-based treatment with enhanced choice for almost a year now, in clinics, homes, and in schools, so a variety of experiences. I'm super passionate about skill-based treatment, as anyone who's been in the BCBAs using the ISCA group can tell. I love this stuff. I love talking about it, which is part of why I'm here today, to be able to talk about it some more. This is truly my HRE right now. So collaborating as a group and having these conversations is the best. We have a super special guest with us today. Dithu is here with us to talk about enhanced choice, and I'm really stoked about that because it's a really special opportunity since We do not have the research yet, so this is really cool, but like background way to get some more info. But with that being said, I know everyone has tons of questions and I want to make sure we get to as many as we can, but I'm going to ask everyone to wait until I'm done presenting and formally say we're going into Q&A before you submit questions. And what I'm hoping we can do is when I say that, say, you know, I have a question, and then I will go back to the chat and call on people to speak up and talk, and then Dithu will answer your questions, then we'll move on to the next person. So after all of that, I'm ready to get started. I'm really excited, and I love talking about this stuff. So I'm not going to stop for chatting during my presentation to try to preserve time after, and hold your questions. If you need to write them down, that's cool. Just keep the chat for chatting, like at each other. Okay, so enhanced choice. I'm going to give mad props to Ed Sidley for this amazing and beautiful work of art in front of us. The foundation of enhanced choice is always skill-based treatment, and the foundation of skill-based treatment is rapport, televisability, happy, relaxed, and engaged, safety, trauma-informed care. And really want to reiterate how important these things are when we're moving into an enhanced choice model. It's not as if they matter more, but they are, the importance of them is very much, it is bigger because the safety component is bigger and the rapport needs to be bigger because you're working with someone who can tell you everything they're thinking. This will create, using these things, using the basis of skill-based treatment, and I truly believe that you have to have a really solid foundation in these core beliefs to do ECM. Because in doing so, you can create and cultivate a space where your learner wants to join you. And this is incredibly important for ECM because we're going to take a big jump from treatment to asking our learners to join us in treatment and giving them that choice to join us. And so you want to create a space where they want to join you. And this is really important. One of the most important pieces of this is the synthesized reinforcers. And we can get those by doing the ISCA, by doing the interview, really putting some time in to the interview because the synthesized reinforcers that are in play are the key to safety and HRE, both of those things. We've had some conversations in the group recently about this, and my experiences align with the idea that in enhanced choice, a lot of times the attention is very important. And so the interview is really important to find out what that attention is. What kind of attention does that learner want when they're in treatment? What makes them HRE? What kind of attention do they like? So we have this foundation: rapport, HRE, televisability, trauma-informed care, safety. These are our core components. And then in enhanced choice, we're going to take this further. We're going to ask our learner to choose to engage in treatment when they are in full control of that choice. This is scary. I just want to put that out there. It is really scary in an ABA model where we don't do this a lot to put this control in the learner's hands and say, choose to go in treatment with me and trust that they will choose treatment, right? So we have to trust. We have to trust our intervention. We have to trust SBT, we have to trust the process, we have to trust ourselves, and most importantly, we have to trust our learner and trust that they're going to tell us what they need out of this intervention. What I do at work with people I work with is to think of yourself. Think of a situation where you yourself might seek out therapy. What kind of relationship do you want to have with your therapist? And what kind of situation is going to have you opt into your therapy treatment? This is not that much different than that. We're asking for our clients to engage in therapy, and they're able to tell us whether or not they want to be there or not. It's scary. You have to get very comfortable being very uncomfortable in this intervention. And this is why I kind of come back to, you have to be really comfortable with SBT in the first place, because being comfortable being uncomfortable grows here. It really grows in enhanced choice. Okay. Let's see. I can move on to my next slide. There we go. Research. We don't have it yet. Woohoo! Lucky for us, Dithu's with us, and he's going to answer some questions afterwards, which is great. But everything we're going to talk about is based in all of the skill-based treatment research, and you can find all of that at practicalfunctionalassessment.com. The basis is there. This is a big jump. It's an extension, so there's definitely more to it, and we're going to go over some of those components today. but the research is coming. It's waiting to be published. So it's, oh, somebody needs to be muted, but it's based on this idea of yearning and earning, which is kind of like weird for us to think about because we're always like, first then you have to do your thing, then your thing. And yearn to earn seems like this foreign concept, but I just love talking about this right now because the best example ever is COVID. We have all been kind of able to access most of our synthesized reinforcement. Like we might not be able to go out with our friends, but we can be at home. Oftentimes we're getting paid to work from home. We're with our families. We have kind of abilities to spend time doing our hobbies, not commuting to work. A lot of those EOs aren't in play. And yet people want to get back to work. They want to earn their paychecks on the work site, not from home, right? Not everybody, but everybody in COVID kind of has this yearn to earn feeling right now, getting back out there and getting back to normal. So it's easier now to help people understand that, given the context of what we're living through right now, that yearn to earn is real. Reinforcers are better when you earn them than when they're free all the time. Freebies are great, but not always. One of my favorite examples of this was Dr. Hanley was talking about whiskey or having a beer. And like, it's great to be handed a free beer, but maybe not when you're presenting at a conference in front of 1,000 people, or when you're, trying to defend your thesis, or when you're, deep in the trenches of something super stressful and you need your full attention. So it's better to have the beer after that stressful thing is over and you can kind of reward yourself with the beer. All right. So who's a candidate for enhanced choice? My favorite saying, I have a cup. I meant to grab it to bring it up here, but it depends. It really depends. I'm going to use a lot of generals and it depends, but generally, this is great for older clients who are typically adolescent or older, although the youngest client I've done ECM with is 6, so that's not exclusive. They have high language. Typically, control is a big reinforcer. And when I say control, I mean man compliance. Everyone does what I say. When I say jump, you jump. When I say do this, you do this. And you do it exactly how I want you to. We play the way that I want to. Everything is I control this environment. So control is a big reinforcer. They have pretty good discrimination skills, although they don't have to have great. I use great, but they don't have to be great. They need to be able to recognize the conditions. And you can teach that. We all know how to teach discrimination. And safety is a big concern. And safety means a lot of things, but we also want to consider not just safety in terms of like how big behaviors are, but also what resources are available to treat those big behaviors or even smaller versions of the big behaviors. So for example, does a school have, or does a clinic have, or does a home have right response trained people, or people trained in crisis intervention, or isolation rooms, or these places that are used to control big behaviors? Are those resources even available in the first place? And if they are or are not, that can also guide your decision. So with that said, those are the generals, but it does really depend. You can use elements of enhanced choice that we're going to talk about with any of your clients. At our organization, we almost always have, and this was something that Eric recommended to me, was an indicator of being in practice. Even if you're not doing anything else with enhanced choice, wearing a bracelet or a hat or a handkerchief or something to tell your learner, we're doing my way, the game is being played. This has been really cool evolution that I've seen where all of a sudden, well, I have some clients who will go and grab the bracelet and hand it to us and walk in the door. I want to do practice, put this on. I have another client, we're generalizing the parents, and he'll go find the bracelet when it's not practice time and hand it to his dad and ask for my way, right? Like, it's a good way to teach that the game is in play, even if you're not doing all of enhanced choice. The other one is opting out. I really like this because oftentimes, if you have a client who's not HRE, you're not running trials, you're kind of waiting for HRE to return. Instead, you could teach them to opt out. Like, hey, I'm not feeling it right now. I just want to take a break from practice and hang out. You don't have to do any other elements of ECM, but you could teach them to advocate and withdraw their consent, which is a huge deal and an amazing skill to have in general, to just tell people when they don't want to do something, even if that's hard to do. Another thing you can do is add choices into your programming. You know, do you want to go to this or do that? And just put those in play in your cabs. And the last little, it depends from what you can take from ECM to put in other programming that's not full ECM, is using varied mands. You might not always do full enhanced choice, but then you might not always ask your client to do an omnibus mand. It's not appropriate with their current language level. It might be more appropriate for them to use varied mands from the start rather than an omnibus mand. Okay, and I'm going to talk about this on a later slide as well. Okay, how to ECM. I'm just going to, number one, reiterate again and again how uncomfortable this process can be. You have to trust the process. It is super weird to not do anything, not even waiting for HRE, but letting a kid tell you, I don't want to do anything right now, and us be like, all right, we're not going to do anything right now. That takes a lot of trust, but it goes both ways. What I love about ECM, and I love this about skill-based treatment too, but there's just this extra element of trust building when a child learns an adult is going to listen to them when they say that they can't. I can't right now, and an adult's like, all right, I hear you. We can't. That's cool. And builds trust both ways. It keeps things safe, and it gives them control over their therapy, which again, you've got to be comfortable being uncomfortable, because that's a scary process. And a lot of people I talked about ECM are like, what if they never choose practice? We'll talk about that later. All right, so how do you do this? If you're going to do full ECM, you can pull and piece this apart, but if you're going to do full ECM, the first thing you're going to do is an initial opt-in to treatment. So what does this look like? Because it's going to be different depending on your setting. If you're in a home, this could look like walking up to the door or coming inside the door, the client seeing you and saying that if you can stay or if you should go. If you're in a clinic, it could be the client coming to you and you asking them if they want to stay or go. And if you're in school, if you're doing pull-out support, it could be going to the client in their current setting and asking them if they want to come with you or stay in class. So that's your initial opt-in, and that's not exclusionary. It can look a lot of different ways. Those are just some examples, but it's just an initial ask if they even want to come with you to do treatment. And I think what this really speaks to is this idea that the client has to want to be with you. And that's on us to make happen, and is also a trust building process. Like, they, at least if we're doing, even if we're just going to go do hangout, that they know that you're the person that they want to hang out with. And that's a really cool thing. When they initially opt in, if they do choose to initially opt in, they can then opt out at any time. They don't have to stay. You know, if they're at the clinic, you might have to plan for this. If they're at home, if you're at the home, you might have to have plans for this. Does that look like you're in the home and they opt out and maybe you just go sit by the door? Do you have to fully leave? I'm not sure, because it depends. You're going to do this based on your client and what needs to happen for that client to build rapport, build trust, keep things safe, and continue that relationship the next time you ask them if they want to do treatment with you. So that's going to look different, and that's something you have to figure out based on your setting and your client and the needs of the program. But you can't go wrong guided by trust, safety, rapport, televisability. So then if they do opt in initially, you can generally prep them for what's going to happen. You can tell them, it doesn't have to be very specific, but you can give them some ideas of like, today, yesterday, maybe we did, when I said no, and you said, okay, I let you have your way. Today, we might ask you to just do one more thing, or we might start working towards going to the table. So just giving them an idea of what might be happening, and you can role play it too. Like, do you want to practice the next step we're going to try? Let's just practice it really quick so you know what it looks like. And you can solicit feedback from there, which is a beautiful thing, and say like, how did that feel? Do you want to, especially at the end, which I'll also talk about. But somebody's drawing on the screen. You can solicit some feedback about that. And your client, if they're in enhanced choice, likely has a good amount of verbal language. They're probably going to tell you too. Like, you might not even need to ask. They're going to be like, that was stupid. And then you're like, yeah, it was. Maybe we should do it a different way next time. Let your learner teach you how to do this. That's what I'm saying. If they're telling you it's stupid, hear them, listen to that, and make some changes. This should be a collaborative process to a certain degree. Okay, so then if they initially opt in, if they opt into treatment initially, then you're going to do a secondary opt-in. Make sure that this language is neutral. So practice or hang out, chill or do some work, whatever, it doesn't matter. The language itself doesn't matter. It's the conditions that are associated with the language that matters. So one of them is when you're going to run specific EOs, and one of them is when no EOs are going to be present. Again, your client can choose to opt out at any time. They can also choose to opt in. They're going to be more likely to opt out. So at any time, even in the middle of a trial, they might just be like, I don't want to do this. I want to hang out. And then you're going to be like, sure, we can hang out, buddy. That sounds good. Hangout is the same as practice. Nothing changes except there are no planned EOs. You're not going to put your calves in place in hangout like you would in practice. Otherwise, nothing changes. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this. So then the next piece of this is if they do ask to opt out, or maybe they haven't even opted in for the second time, how do you determine when to ask them if they want to opt in, if they want to do practice? So this, again, you can let your learner teach you. Sometimes a learner only wants you to ask them once and never again. And they'll either tell you later or they won't. Sometimes you need to ask them a couple times throughout session. They'll let you know if you're bugging them. And again, if you're asking too much, if you're bothered, they're going to tell you. Their behavior will tell you, or their verbal language will tell you. And so make adjustments based on what they're telling you. Again, that's going to build trust. They're not bothering me. Cool. I feel better about hanging out with them. You might also, I didn't put this on here, but it just popped in my head. You might also need to teach them to opt out. Right? So you might be in the middle of something and teach them the opt-out option instead of problem behavior. Teaching them to say, I want to hang out instead of practice. So that could also be a consideration. And then after the session, you can review what happened. You know, how did that go for you? Is there anything you didn't like? Is there anything you should change, etc.? And again, listen and make changes. Listen to what they're saying. So some tips. You can consider when you're in treatment and running cabs, when you're in practice, offering choices to turn down the heat initially. So do you want to do this or do you want to do that? Do you want to do this kind of homework or that kind of homework? Should we run chores or whatever? Eventually, though, you do want to move away from this and fade it, because eventually you want to teach your learner to comply with adult-led directions, because that's typically one of the issues. The space, there are some considerations about space. So the conditions are not always perfect, and we don't always have 2 rooms. We don't always have all the things that we need to replicate exactly how this will look when the research is published. But you could make some considerations around how you can do this within the same space. You can have a divider, or you could not have a divider. You could just have your indicator. You could have 2 different rooms, or maybe you don't. So it just depends on what resources do you have available. Most of mine, just from my personal experience, have done pretty great with just verbal language and one of those indicators for practice and hangout, because I'm typically working in situations where I don't have 2 spaces and I don't have replications of my 2 conditions. Hangout and practice wouldn't look the same. And so it doesn't make sense to use 2 different spaces, even if I had them. My bonus idea is a salient cue, and I already talked about this, but you can use some kind of indicator that you're in practice or hangout. You just have to watch out for negative or stimuli that might have negative connotations, like a red and green sign, red for hangout, green for practice. We don't want to have anything negative associated with hangout. And I'm going to talk about that on the next slide. It can be a bracelet, like I talked about. It could be a picture on the wall and a picture off the wall. It could just be the language itself. It could be a divider in the room, like I talked about. It could be 2 different spaces. You can be creative on how you do this. What matters is your learner's behavior tells you whether that's working for them or not, and then you make adjustments based on how that's going. Okay, some tips. This is I feel like the most important thing I talk to people about for enhanced choice. Hangout has to be the same as practice. And this is, again, scary. It's scary to not change conditions and make an aversive condition and a positive condition. But you have to be very careful that there's nothing negative associated with hangout, because you want your learners to choose hangout. You want them to opt out instead of engaging in problem behavior. This is what keeps this so safe. So be careful making sure that your reinforcers are tied. They look the same. And again, I'm going to say it again. Get comfortable being uncomfortable, because it doesn't feel like you're doing anything when you're sitting in Hangout, but you are. You're doing things. You're doing great things. You're teaching someone that their behavior works for them. You believe in them. You trust them, and you're giving them that space to learn to trust you too. This is very important. But what happens if they never choose practice? If you go multiple days and sessions without your client ever choosing practice, not even one time, or not consistently, or not for very long, you can make some adjustments to Hangout. You can make, I didn't write this in here, but it just popped in my head. First of all, I would just make sure that if they are choosing practice, the way that you're running practice is very conscious. You're not running trials too quickly. You're not turning up the heat too fast. You're not moving too fast, because you will get to cab 5 in a day if they're feeling it, but then the next day they're not going to want to practice because it was too hard, too fast. So take your time if you do get practice. But if you're doing all of those things and you're still not getting practice time, you can consider slightly changing your Hangout condition. But again, your Hangout condition needs to mean safety and rapport, and you don't want to get to a place where your learner won't choose Hangout. But you could change a small element of Hangout, like a slightly different level of attention, or maybe a little bit less quality of something, to kind of give them that little edge to want to do practice instead. But we do not want to gain aversive control. We don't want to get to the point where the learner doesn't want to do Hangout because they don't get the same reinforcers. And so they're choosing practice, but then engaging in problem behaviors and won't choose Hangout to keep things safe. So it's important that you balance all of those considerations when you get to the place when you're thinking about changing your Hangout conditions. Hangout helps us avoid physical management too. And I think it's a beautiful thing to be able to choose a kid to just tell you to leave them alone rather than having to put your hands on them. And we talked about this a little bit earlier, but especially if you're doing full enhanced choice, really consider using age-appropriate communication and not necessarily forcing the omnibus man. It's likely, and you might even accept initially some inappropriate communication and shape it into more appropriate communication, right? Like it might have some attitude, or it might come out a little wrong, and it might even have some swear words in it. Accept it initially, like make it chill, make it fun. This kid knows what's up, and then slowly shape things over time. But if you have a learner who's like, hey, I want you to hold the blue controller and play Luigi, and you're like, say my way, that's gonna be kind of weird. So just accept, hold the blue controller and play Luigi. That's great verbal communication. We want to reinforce those specific commands. And speaking of video games, this is my last consideration. When you're playing video games, it's really important, video games tend to be a big part of a lot of kids' HRE, but in ECM, and really anytime, it's important that you're aware of what's happening in the video game so you can plan your EOs around the video game, especially initially. If they're like in a game that can't be paused, and if they stop, they lose, you might not be able to place your EO every time in the middle. You might need to do it you might need to be very careful about when you place your EOs. You also might think about if they're about to win the race, waiting until they win the race to place your EO and asking them to pause, right? Or take advantage of those early trials if you're in practice and they're in the middle of a race and they can't pause it, to run a CFCR or a TR where they don't have to stop anything. And then they get even better reinforcement because you're letting them keep playing. They feel even more in control of the environment. So those are most of my tips. That's it. Thank you. I am really excited now because I can officially say, I'm going to stop sharing and open the chat before I do this, but I'm going to open this up for Q&A. And I'm going to, if you have a question, just put in the chat, I have a question, and I'm going to go in order, and I'm going to call on you and let you talk and ask your questions. Oh, and so much chat that I missed. Holy cow. All right, Maria, you're up.
Hi, sorry, I had to unmute. So I have a quick question. So how long do you wait? So when they choose to hang out, how long do you wait in order to present the request again of practice or present the stimuli?
Hillary, did you want to take this one, or do you want me to just answer all these? Okay, great.
Well, that's up to you. I'm going to defer to you. You're the expert here.
Well, that was a pretty expert presentation, so
Well,
I wouldn't go that far. That was really terrific. Maria, it's nice to see you. I know we chatted a little while ago, so it's great to see you. I want to answer this question, but I'm going to do this super cheesy thing and ask that we all give Hillary a round of applause, because that's hard stuff. That's really great. That was a really good presentation. Okay, so a specific question that you're asking, Maria, is if a child were to elect to hang out, how long would you wait? In the study that we did, we basically waited about 5 minutes. So we just let the child hang out, and every 5 minutes or so, we would basically say, remember, we do still have that practice context over there if you're interested in going and doing another session. But I think I like Hillary's point about being sensitive to the learner, that if they're like, I know, just leave me alone, I want to just hang out, then you would just kind of let that be, per se, because the point of that hangout space is truly to minimize any planned EOs. So yeah, but I think, but I found that doing it about every 5 minutes or so, well, with any of the clients that we did it with, they rarely stayed in hangout for that long anyway. Usually, if you are preventative on the front end and proactive, and those are some thoughts that I thought Hillary articulated really well, and I'd like to expand upon those. Kids will typically choose to go to hangout just in the moment when things are tough, collect themselves, and oftentimes they'll go right back in. But I would say on average we wait about 5 minutes, just let them sit and trust that we're not going to bother them before we kind of bother them a little.
Okay, cool. And I have another one if I can. So is this a good model for like a group of kids, or is it just specifically for like individual, like one-on-one?
Dang, that's a really good question. So the paper that I submitted alongside Dr. Greg Hanley was submitted with individual applications, one-on-one focused intensive behavioral intervention.
Okay.
I'll refer you to the work of Dr. Robin Landa, who's at the May Institute in Massachusetts. And this is something that hasn't been submitted for publication yet, but Dr. Robin Landa basically did a replication and extension of this process with a small group of kids. She was in a classroom at the May Institute where they had 6 kids. So she basically broke that group of 6 kids up into 2 pods. And there was some very, very creative functional analyzing and treatment processes. But the moral of the story is the outcome was that she was able to implement enhanced choice model while independently programming EOs for these clients, but then collectively allowing them to experience reinforcement, and all the while letting them opt in or opt out of their treatment.
Okay,
so
that's awesome.
Yeah, great. It is possible. It definitely requires, it's a team effort, that's for sure, and it requires a little bit of creativity with respect to setting up your baseline condition in the PFA, but it's possible.
Okay, well, thank you.
You're welcome. Nice to see you, Maria.
Nice to see you.
So much good research. Thanks. So much good research. I can't wait. Nicole was next, but Annalise, I think I'm saying that right, said she could ask her question because she's got loud kids in the background. So I'm going to let Annalise ask Nicole's question. Annalisa, sorry, Annalisa.
It's okay. You're not the first and you're not the last. That's for sure. So we just had a couple of questions. So we're thinking of, as we're going back on site to our school programming and for our kids who have more challenging behavior, like how we might be able to utilize this. And so what are some other examples of modifications like you guys have made to Hangout to get the students to choose practice? So if a kid is going to continue to choose Hangout, even with modifications, kind of differentiating level of attention, but they're still choosing Hangout, how far would you push it before it reaches that like aversive level?
That's a really good question. Is this a question, Annalisa, that you're asking alongside Nicole Connor Moore?
Yes.
That's amazing. Hello, Nicole.
Hated to.
Nicole and I have chatted about some of this in the past, and in fact, a conversation that I had with Nicole about a year ago really changed the way that I think about talking about enhanced choice model entirely. And so I'm really glad that you asked this question that's about what are the other modifications that you make, or how far do the modifications go to alter Hangout so that kids will choose practice. I want to start by saying that the time in which we were doing ECM with these clients seems like, to me, like freaking decades ago. Because if you've been following along with like FTF and Dr. Hanley's work, Dr. Hanley, the model in practice is updated a lot quicker than the research is. Everybody, I think, who's here, who's familiar with some of Dr. Hanley's trainings are aware of that. But there's, I can't stress the extent to which that has occurred. And a lot of the moves that have been made procedurally from the FTF standpoint, the recommendations that they give, are tactics that promote safety in and of themselves. And they are, some of these tactics are embedded in the enhanced choice model. Some of them are now things that sort of seem to be like, this is just how people should do PFA and SBT. But I really wish to emphasize this because I have learned since then, like I left Dr. Hanley's lab before FTF started. I came out here to Baltimore and I've been hanging out here ever since. I go back to FTF meetings and I feel like a kid coming home from college and dad turned my bedroom into a gym. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm like, what is all this cab branching? What are these, these are things that I have to learn to communicate about. But some of these modifications that are now kind of being disseminated, if you watch Dr. Hanley's trainings, are truly things that I would actually probably recommend before recommending jumping to enhanced choice model. We heard Hillary today, and I did the same thing when I talked about ECM, giving so many autoclitics to say, like, don't worry, I know it's scary, it's terrifying, but you have to trust. And I agree with that. But I want to basically give you what I'd like to talk about are maybe 5 or 6 other tactics that you can consider before you even jump to doing enhanced choice model with your client. Number 1, the main reason that we were inspired to do an enhanced choice model was because we brought a kid into an outpatient clinic. His name was Jeffrey. He was an amazing kid. And he basically earned reinforcement in the ISCA by engaging in a small, teeny weeny amount of problem behavior, but was over it. He was in reinforcement. I said, never mind, you don't have to do the work. Why don't we just keep playing? But he was kind of over it. He didn't like being in the small room. So he tried to dip out and go see his dad. Per our clinic procedures, we kept that door shut. We didn't let him go. And per our clinic procedures and the reason we had a video camera and we didn't want him getting on into an undergraduate classroom, we literally evoked an extraordinary burst of problem behavior when the EO was so freaking abundantly clear that he just wanted to go see dad and he wanted to be out of my face. That led us to this development of what some might call a pretty complex model. But since then, if you've been paying attention, been following along, Dr. Hanley and myself and many others of us have endorsed the notion of an open door functional analysis process. And what that means is rather than set up a separate space where they can go hang out, just follow their lead and follow them around wherever they go and trust that following them will in fact, or allowing them to move about will in fact keep problem behavior at bay, as opposed to setting up maybe 2 separate spaces. So even when it comes to like I think about this a lot, like maybe the enhanced choice model would have been obviated. We wouldn't have considered it if at that time our clinic procedures allowed for us to just let children move about the space. So one tactic that promotes safety is to not restrict kids to a particular space. And that certainly applies to the type of children that, or adolescents that Hillary is describing, kids with a lot of language, kids who are oppositional in nature, and kids who are just generally combative. So that's thing number 1, to promote safety, is let kids move around.
How would you suggest doing that? I guess if you may not have an answer, in a school
During
environment, in COVID world, where
Sure.
you have to be zoned and you have to be separated, and pre-COVID, that's so much easier, but COVID has thrown a wrench in everything.
That's super true. I have a couple thoughts. The idea is still obviously that you try to make your analysis context, your treatment context, your practice context as reinforcing as possible. And that's where personalization and synthesis really come into play. So there should be, after you've done your interviewing, you've designed your PFA, ideally 9/10 of all the possible reinforcers that could impinge on this child's problem behavior are in the space where you want them to be. Meaning they're responding should, in theory, be allocated to that space. If they are then a person who would rather move about, or when we say keep the door open, we're saying follow them to see what the reinforcer is that you missed, that you didn't put in your analysis space. So if you have a place where there's 90% of their fun stuff there and you're there, sorry, I'll try to minimize my bad language.
All good.
But then they just choose to step out. I mean, the difference is rather than closing the door, open the door. You let them step out, and more often than not, they'll find something and bring it back with them. Of course, there are the kiddos for whom wandering is the thing. Like they just want to move about. And I guess it's a really good question. How are we going to do this in a COVID world? But the point is that I'll list a couple of other tactics that I think will help keep kids in the space. I think it's like your options are either follow them and don't restrain them, or restrain them and don't follow them. And that to me seems like you have a choice that's potentially safer and a choice that's not. But let me say like 5 or 6 more things before we get to the point where like they're still leaving, because I still think there's other stuff that we can do in there. Another thing is, as Hillary articulated nicely, we need to take a look at ourselves and say, am I that fun or am I not that fun? Because it's possible that we're not that fun. And we need to be comfortable saying that, because again, the math is clear. The science is clear. If they're leaving, thank you, Eric. If they're leaving, there's something about that space that's aversive enough that they want to leave. So we need to also think about all the various ways in which we might be contributing to that. So they might be leaving to go get something else. They might be leaving to get away from us. So these are all elements of your initial planning, your initial interviewing, and your initial PFA design that I can't stress enough as important to keep kids kind of in that space.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so those are a couple of tactics, and I know I didn't satisfactorily answer the whole COVID thing, and I mean I don't really have an answer beyond
Hang
that.
on,
But
you said like 6, and you gave us 2.
I think there's a good answer for the COVID thing. Honestly, I think that's something that everyone is just figuring out as we go. There's no good answer.
Yeah. I do think that I can defend letting a child wander around to some degree as potentially less transmitting of COVID than 5 or 6 adults restraining that child and then going on to working in another pod, having to cross this pod to this pod to restrain that child. Do you know what I'm saying? Like that to me seems defensible. I understand that what I just said doesn't propose a solution or a tactic. But
that's the same thing that we ended up doing, Dithu, was making the decision around, was it more important for them to roam into rooms that we didn't want them to go into, or to put them in a restraint? And we chose to let them go into rooms and seeing what we could do to try to be as COVID as possible with the precautions that we had in place, but that we were going to choose that over restraints.
How did that?
And,
go ahead, Shane.
Oh yeah, and similar to that, Dithu actually gave us really good advice in a case, and we work in a clinic that looks like a school, and similar COVID. This kid he likes to wander, likes to move, and we tried to restrict, and then it was like, oh, this isn't going to work. Sorry about my kids in the background. Let's just let him wander, and we just kind of came up with a plan of some kids were more cooperative to move, because we still wanted to keep those boundaries. And also what we found out is that the wandering kind of stopped after kind of that point of like, oh, what are you wandering to? And then we're like, okay, how can we make wandering even more fun and not like, how can we up our fun? So we actually were like, hey, I bet this kid would love to go outside and run around. So we're like, let's bring some of the stuff he wanders to outside. So at least we're not having too many people out there, but almost like making another room that could maybe be even like a hangout if we looked at it that way. But we also upped our fun outside. So we all get to go outside and burn some more calories too and do some stuff. So that has really helped us by letting the wondering happen and trusting like, okay, this might slowly shape if we kind of keep on our game to something else.
Yeah.
Very cool. Thanks, Shane. So anyway, I think we're still talking about analysis, but I think it's important, right? And I think there's a reason that we belabor an analysis because it helps us understand all these little nitty-gritty things. So I want to just echo what Hillary said, like your context isn't done until you feel as though this child does want to kind of come back into this space. It shouldn't be like you leave your analysis like, well, they hated that, but let's start treatment tomorrow. You know, you want to do a little bit more work to ensure that they're happy, relaxed, and engaged. And speaking of that, that's another tactic that has been this update. That back when we were doing things in this ECM original application, we were still doing these time-based decisions. We were putting in the EO after 30 to 45 seconds had elapsed, and it wasn't always when the child was happy, relaxed, and engaged. And with Jeffrey, this client that kind of initiated this process, that was the exact thing. The EO came in too hot. He wasn't ready for it. So he said, you know what, F this, I'm out of here. And then we blocked him. So another tactic that promotes safety is to wait for the learner's behavior to indicate to you that they are ready to have an EO put in place before doing that. And that means, you know, letting reinforcement kind of massaging out any of the bad during reinforcement until you find that they're happy, relaxed, and engaged. And that same thing can apply to your treatment sessions in that same practice context. Should they choose to practice, you still don't need to be putting in an EO every minute. In fact, with some of these learners, now we're really seeing that the path towards keeping them in the practice space involves stretching it out even further, 5-minute intervals, maybe 5 to 7 minute intervals of reinforcement. Is that going to lead to a slower process? You betcha. Do we have data to suggest that it's too slow? Not yet. Do we have data to suggest that it'll go at the same pace? We do with our initial applications. But I can appreciate the notion that we're moving toward, rather than get kids through this efficiently, we want to keep them through it safely, and we want them to keep coming back. So I think that that's another tactic that actually promotes safety throughout assessment and treatment, is reinforcement should be programmed until the child is happy, relaxed, and engaged for a period of time. I'll just so we can get to more questions, I'll just say one more tactic that I think is so important, a really important update, and it's this whole CAB branching business. If you've been following along, you're probably aware that we have these 6 CAB branches. That wasn't the way that it was before. In fact, if you go back and read the Hanley 2014 paper or replications that were followed close in time, the CABs are kind of a hot mess. And it's sort of like we did easy, and then we did medium, and then we did hard. And they just kind of went for it. And it's worth remembering that a lot of kids got socially meaningful, a lot of the kids that went through got socially meaningful outcomes with that as the CAB model. We have since learned that we need to really slow that down and task analyze the heck out of our contextually appropriate behavior chains. And that, to me, is another huge recommendation that should come before you set up this hangout space even, because it teaches you that you need to be sensitive to the learner's progress and to only push them so far as they're ready to go. And doing that helps keep them there, helps keep them wanting to come back. Like, we're talking about trying to create an errorless process where every step of the way the client is successful with their appropriate behavior that you are shaping, and that it's not too much to ask. Are you going to mess up and maybe do something too far, go from 1 math problem to 5 math problems, and they're like, screw this, I don't want 5? Maybe. I think that you can prevent it by being like, why do we need to jump to 5 if we can just jump to 2 math problems? Why do we need to jump to doing math homework if we could just start with take your hand off of the iPad? That's your first CAB. Way to go, kid. Let's get back to reinforcement. Look up from your iPad. You're doing great. Way to go, kid. Come back to reinforcement. So I think that the CAB 1 and CAB 2, as FTF and Dr. Hanley describes it today, are tactics that promote safety insofar as they really, really teach the child that there's about 1,000 behaviors from here to there that you can engage in that I might reinforce, rendering your problem behavior unnecessary, rendering your option to leave unnecessary. So I suppose I'll stop with that, because I'm sure there will be other follow-up questions, but these are the things that I have been finding that I'm recommending first before being like, okay, now let's mess with this hangout space. And I have not run into someone yet who's been able to tell me, yes, we have done this. We've it's an open door thing. We're making only performance-based decisions. Our camp branches you couldn't break down that behavior anymore if we tried. Like, I have not run into that yet. So that's why I'm so steadfast in recommending those things as tactics that promote safety.
So to clarify, you and I have talked a lot about this, I know, but have you had to make modifications for your learners in the hangout space to promote practice at any point?
Not in the research work that we've done, but yes, in the practice work that we've done. Mm-hmm. But doing so was presented a different set of problems. So Hillary had up a slide, the last slide in the PowerPoint, that was like, it needs to be identical. Mm-hmm. I would put a caveat on that to say, we don't know that it needs to be identical yet, but if you think about the clients who we're talking about, the clients for whom this is most appropriate, kids with a lot of language, kids who know when they're being burned and when they're being gamed and when they're being kind of tooled around with, and kids, as Hillary said, who really don't like being told what to do and like to tell other people what to do. I think that the game of manipulating room A and room B is very gamey, and it can come off as very gamey. So that's why that is my biggest reservation about making these manipulations across hangout and practice. But I will say that I think that there's a level of framing, the way that we approach it, the way that we talk about it, the way that we present it to kids might be helpful. So let's say that there's a kid, this was the case with Jeffrey, and because this is our first application. We had a clinic iPad, and he had his own iPad, and he also had his Nintendo 3DS. We allowed Jeffrey to take his iPad and his 3DS into the hangout space any point in time. He could bring any caregiver he wanted or treatment team member, and we would talk and we'd comply with his mans and stuff. We kept that clinic iPad in the practice context, which was something that he never himself used, but it allowed him to play an interactive game or something like that with an adult. That is a variation that we did. However, we never framed it like, well, if you want to play the interactive game, you need to choose practice. We never framed it like, well, listen, if you want to have a lot of fun, I need you to do that. That's the equivalent to me of saying, you can go into that hangout room, but I'm just going to put the temperature down to 59 degrees Fahrenheit. It's basically saying like, it's chill, but not that chill. So there are ways to kind of frame it, and there's somebody in this chat with us named Frank, whose Zoom name is Gateway Pediatric, and Frank and I have worked together with a client for whom we did enhanced choice model and for whom we had to make some of these slight adjustments. But I will say again, when we looked at the tape, like it's ESPN2, when we went to the tape, all of those other tactics that I mentioned on the front end were things that were slightly off in the practice context. And that once we adjusted those, we did see a little bit more response allocation to the practice context. So I say it again, like that, I really would recommend exhausting those before you go to this whole, you run the risk. There's no amount of framing that a kid may not pick up to. They might get wise to it and be like, I see what you're doing here. Cool, you want me to do that? The more fun stuff in there, fine. I'm going to choose it, but I'm going to keep having problem behavior. I'm not ready for this, So did I get close to answering your question? I think I might have answered like 80 questions, but that nobody asked.
Close. Yeah, I think so too. Mm-hmm.
You're welcome.
We just had one more quick question of if a child is engaging in challenging behavior during practice and they are not manding to go to hangout or to do anything else, how are you responding then?
Yeah, okay. I'm sorry. I have two more tactics and I'll be very, very quick about this. Two more tactics and I'll be very, very quick. Another tactic, and this is embedded in the enhanced choice model. You can read about it one day, I hope. Another tactic is to be very, very abundantly clear on the front end about what the child will experience in the practice room. So before they make the choice, just communicate to them that today the hardest EO that you'll face in this practice room is that I might put my hand on your iPad. But don't worry, the most behavior I will ask out of you is a tolerance response today. The most you'll have to do is mand. I deny it. You say that's cool. And I stick with that if I tell the children that. That is, in my opinion, and our data suggests another tactic that promotes safety. And it's sort of, again, it helps establish rapport. It helps create a collaborative kind of shared governance of the treatment process. It's like, hey, kid, are you ready? We're going to go in there. Today we might work on math and reading. Is there a particular math worksheet that you have been struggling with or that you want to work on today? So we bring those things in the room. That's another tactic. But the tactic that I'm referring to that I think that to directly address your question, Annalisa, about if they're still having problem behavior, and this is something that is another update in the FTF process, reinforce the heck out of it. You can literally, if your PFA has not taught you that you can turn behavior off with your synthesized reinforcer, then you haven't done the PFA to the extent that you need to yet. And that should be able to apply in other moments when you're doing EOs. So what are we talking about? We're basically talking about giving kids what they want, like across so many different contexts where we don't want to be doing that. I'm talking about in EO, putting a demand in place. They are not listening. We would think that we need to at least do some kind of extinction because we're never going to learn. But I'm saying if their precursor behavior persists beyond a point where you're comfortable, I would probably just back off, go to reinforcement, and then you might even do a little pep talk with them where you're like, wow, we probably pushed too far there, huh? Well, maybe we'll try again in a different session if you still want to practice, and maybe we'll try something easier. And it allows you to be, doing this kind of stuff forces you to be really flexible in your treatment, right? If you're like, I tried to do a CAB 1 and this kid had a lot of problem behavior, I reinforced it to put out the fire in the moment. And it looks like by doing that, this child is choosing to stay in practice again. We've lived to teach another trial. My next trial on my data sheet says I should do a CAB 5, but you know what? I'm just going to do an FCT trial, whatever, a yes trial, as Dr. Jess Slayton likes to say. And then we'll build from there again. I'm not saying you go back to complex FCT as a phase. I'm saying you can make decisions trial to trial so that you can live to teach another trial, so that you can live to still have a good positive relationship with this learner. That's the kind of stuff that I say, like Hillary says it, like just trust that reinforcing their problem behavior as a precursor here will not ruin the progress that you've made, as long as you can keep programming trials and keep encouraging them and inspiring them to engage in adaptive behavior. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Some thoughts. It is like, it comes from a place where just imagine a world where you just couldn't restrain no matter what. If you wanted to turn the behavior off, this is what we ask in our interviews, right? We're like, if you're on a plane with your child and they start acting out, what the heck are you going to do to turn that behavior off? And they typically teach us about all the synthesized reinforcers for problem behavior. So the same thing can apply in our treatment. It's a crappy trial. We're not proud of it. We're not going to move on to the next phase, but it gives us an opportunity to regroup, replan, or make a moment-to-moment decision and have them be more successful on that next trial.
And it builds trust.
Yeah.
Reinforcing problem behavior builds trust.
Which is a weird thing. It just doesn't even sound right.
No, it doesn't. This is amazing. I just want to say how incredible this hangout is right now. The next person with a question is Lena. Are you still here? Yeah, there she is.
Hi, thank you so much for the presentation. I wanted to share an experience that happened today. Maybe it's a question. So we did an enhanced choice model with a client. He had a bad day at school, and today was the first day of the ISCA. So I said to the parents, we might not push really hard on the EOs today. So I'm gonna try, a few other things. So we were able to manipulate a few things, but we didn't see any problem behavior. So I tried to up the heat a little bit until I did what I wanted to do. And originally asking him to go to the table with me and leave all the reinforcers to do some work. And he said, yeah, sure, okay. And then I think so we did an extended hangout. We spent really, really good time together. We built amazing rapport. And I think that was too good to the extent that he was handling it very well. Like, I don't know what else to do. And I tried to give him more and more like harder work. And I could see there is a change in his facial expressions. Like, he wasn't that happy, but I didn't see any problem behavior per se. So what else can I do? Maybe not to extend that hangout for longer duration. What would you say?
Oh, so are you talking about just doing an analysis? And so you're just talking about the reinforcement interval?
Yeah, so that was the first day of the analysis, and we tried to evoke problem behavior many times in different ways based on the interview that we made, and we didn't see any. Like, I was hoping we can evoke some problem behavior.
Sure. Yeah, so this happened with a client that I was working with very recently. Where we tried everything that we thought was working, but or that we thought should work, and it didn't work. The short answer, my short recommendation is it's really always helpful to have somebody who's familiar with the problem behavior present. Was there somebody there during this ISCA who has seen the problem behavior?
His mom was there. And
Okay.
usually that's what they shared. Like, if you present academic work, if you stop the game, if you leave him, discontinue the attention, if he's so excited to play a game, control, manipulate how he's playing the game. I tried like saying, okay, now I'm going to put this here instead. So I did on purpose manipulate the way he's playing, he's doing his Play-Doh. He handled everything very well, and it was a bad day today at school. I was expecting he's gonna blow at the first EO. He handled it very well.
Sure. It sounds like you did a lot of the right things. It sounds like you listened to the parents and that they were basically telling you, man, we can't believe that none of this evoked problem behavior. There's a couple things that I did hear though. One was that you said you noticed that his affect changed, and I understand that that's very unsatisfying because you want to probably see like a whine or like, a quick little, he hits the table, and you didn't see that.
Right.
But if you're saying I could tell that his affect was different, then that might suggest that there's some behavior that parents might report co-occurs with or is a precursor to the problem behavior. So one thing that we sometimes do is somebody will say something like this. They'll say, well, they're not happy, but they're not having problem behavior.
Yeah.
And exactly. I basically just ask in the moment for an operational definition of what does not happy mean, because it's like, what do you mean when you say not happy? You say, well, they're grimacing, their face is totally different. Their what's it called? Their brow is burrowed, furrowed. I don't know how that phrase works. And then I point to I try to see if there's somebody else in the room, and I say, did you see that too? And if we have two people, we call that inner observer agreement. And the important question is, Mom, does that type of facial grimace lead to problem behavior some of the time? The answer is usually yes. If that's the case, I would feel comfortable reinforcing that very, very, very low intensity but problem behavior, because it's an associated non-dangerous topography of problem behavior.
Yeah.
And then
that makes sense.
Yeah, it gives you an opportunity to teach the child the contingency in the functional analysis. But I would also encourage you to maybe do one more check with the mom and say, what are all the things we're missing? The way that I said that, is that the way that you say it when it evokes problem behavior? The tone of my voice, is that the way that you deliver these demands? It's very hard to break our BCBA or our behavior analyst voice where we're like, okay, it's time to do work. But sometimes the kids are like, oh, we're doing this again, are we? Okay, fine. Yeah, I'll do it. So it's nice to get that input from mom. Be like, well, I obviously don't say, okay. I say, let's go. Let's get to work. And that might.
Makes sense. Yeah, I was in my mind like, please do something.
Well, there's so many other things. It might just be that there might be some harder work that you need to program, or more work. Make the work look harder, like there's just a mountain of it. So things of that.
He didn't know how to do the work. He didn't know, but he didn't show any really problem behavior per se. He was like, I don't know. He was unsure on what to do, but I didn't see problem behavior, the one that we were looking for, or a precursor, or like a hand fist, or banging on the table, or like rolling himself, or the things that we have listed with parents. So that's why I was wondering, oh, okay.
So
what
yeah,
do we do
the
now?
quick, I'll make the recommendation quick. I want you to go back tomorrow or whenever you do this again and pay attention to that thing that you mentioned. Oh, his face changed. And maybe you can call it a grimace or a grunt or something like that, and see if there's two people that can agree when it happens. That's a very important. We don't want just one person making that decision. We want two people saying, yeah, that looks different. That's angry, whoever, you know? And then that might be something that you might consider reinforcing. Thank you, Lena.
Yeah, thanks.
We are running out of time. We have about 10 more minutes. Jill, you're next.
Okay, my question is about that child who loves to just play by himself. Totally into himself on the iPad, doesn't really want anyone else around.
Okay.
Definitely a candidate for enhanced choice model. He fits the whole bill of what Hillary described.
Tell me why. Why do you say he's perfect for the enhanced choice model?
Major control is his thing. Very high functioning, lots of language, wants everybody to do everything down to the T his way all the time.
Okay. But his reinforcement time, if he could do things his way, he would just be alone.
Most of the time.
Okay, so just for the sake.
This is a home-based client. So the therapist goes in and literally she sits on the couch for hours watching him play.
I see. And he doesn't want her near him. He doesn't want to interact with her.
Not so much. I mean, like Hillary and I have been working on it, and there are definitely a few things she could do differently, but there is that still core base that he really isn't that interested in. He will do some toy play with other people, but he prefers electronics. He prefers his games and his videos.
I see. So what's the question? Is it like, is the question about if this model is appropriate, or is it like just how would you go about doing this model?
I was thinking how you would go about doing the model, because he does seem to be a prime candidate for it.
I see.
So the idea that you had given, like with the other iPad in the practice part, kind of resonated when you were talking about that perhaps could be a way to.
Yeah, so one of the things that I'm thinking as I'm hearing this is that I do know kids like what you're describing, where they have tons of language and they really do like bossing people around, and they like to be in control of others. Like, you know, you sit over there, mommy, I want you to sit in this seat, and daddy, you sit in that seat, and stuff like that. But it appears as though they're generally kind of solitary in their time. I tend to think about that as though maybe adults tend to signal EOs. Maybe adults tend to signal that it's not going to be an improvement with the adult there. So to me, I think a lot of the homework does come in like, how do we engender cooperative interactive play? We could set it up in the space, that's good, but we obviously still want to follow their lead. And some of the sensitivities that Hillary was mentioning earlier about maybe you're not like prompting them to play with you, but you just keep it available. Maybe you don't even really present any kind of vocal thing until they initiate interaction. These are some strategies.
Would it be appropriate to have perhaps a game that they could play together available, and not even necessarily call it practice time at this point, because we can't seem to even get any type of FCR out of him.
Can't seem to get any type of FCR out of him.
We're not paired well at all. We still are in the rapport stage, but
yeah.
Difficult to get rapport when he prefers to play by himself.
Yeah. Well, so I think one of the things I want to point out is that for all of the kids for whom we have been successful with this process, at least in my experience, we've gotten them through to the promised land. That process was done in a pullout sense. And an additional point is that they were coming from a business as usual life that was kind of unpredictable and where there was kind of EOs all over the place. I have not done this process with a kid who's just no demands his whole life and just basically doing his way his whole life. I know that FTF is currently consulting on some of those cases, but it's a slower slog because the idea that Hangout can't be significantly like the same as what it is before. It needs to be an improvement from business as usual. So if their business as usual is that what you're describing, Jill, that this kid just sits on an iPad?
I'm following you. I think, go ahead with what you're saying.
But is he just on his iPad for 24 hours of the day?
Yeah, for the most part. And a pacifier bottle, and the kid is 6.
And he's 6.
He demands people to bring it to him.
So, okay, so he has some language, but it's mostly just.
Oh, he's very, very, full
very language able. Yeah. So
it's that, what people describe as ODD.
That all makes sense to me. I do think that caveat that he spends most of his day doing things entirely his way, and that riddle me this, does that result in a lot of, is he still in crisis? Is he still having a lot of problem behavior? Or now is it at a point where he just is docile the whole day, but it's because he has his iPad and all of his stuff?
I would say yes. The only way he does not act out is when his demands are met, they're met all day long.
They're met all day long, right? So
his parents give into whatever he wants, whenever he wants it, in order to avoid any problem behavior.
Sure. So despite the fact that he meets the criteria for ECM according to what we described earlier, which I have to be honest is an arbitrary line, but it's something that we think based on our experience is like a way to treat a particular set of clients with a different level of humanity, you might say. But the fact that he's doing things his way most of the day and that is not having a ton of problem behavior might make me reconsider an approach where we show up and we say, do you want to do what you've been doing 23 hours of the day, or do you want to do practice? You might just consider, again, some of these other tactics that I've mentioned, and that it's just when you're there, you're kind of doing the process and you are kind of putting those EOs in place. But Jill, I think even you said it nicely, like I'm trying to think about how we can beef up the reinforcement context to make it so that when we put in EOs that there's a lot of value to getting back to that reinforcement.
Hillary, you have anything more educational to add, since your knowledge is greater than mine?
I've been kind of chatting with
properly.
Yeah, we've been chatting a little bit about this case. I think, Jill, and we've talked about this, that the technician themselves needs to be the thing that's extra wonderful.
I'm trying to put that part aside in my questioning because there's other issues here as well.
Yeah, I know, but I do think that because I have run cases of SBT in homes where it's keep a lid on it 24/7, and us showing up means practice. But what is important in those times is that the person showing up is the person the child wants to see and do practice with. And I think if you had that, it would change things for your treatment. I think it really would. I think right now the child doesn't really want to engage with the therapist from what I've seen. And you've mentioned that as well. And I think if that dynamic shifted, I think he might be more willing to engage in some of the FCRs, because when she was being really fun, you were able to get him to emit some FCRs because he was super HRE.
Until he realized that was the game that he doesn't want to play.
Right.
Yeah.
This is a really beautiful point and a beautiful conversation. If you think about what you described, Jill, you're basically saying that a kid is in HRE all day long, right? That they're in reinforcement essentially all day long. And we can either improve upon that reinforcement and then try to make the EO a little bit more salient and teach from there. Or we can just like consider it that is where they're at and celebrate the fact that that means that they're not in crisis, which is a good thing. And then start to slowly introduce a more efficient way to produce reinforcement than your problem behavior. It reminds me of another thing that the problem solving that Hillary just described reminds me of another thing that I want to throw out there to Nicole and Annalisa, which is that if you are trying something fresh, when I say stuff like just reinforce and don't physically manage, I absolutely expect that many of you are giving me that SpongeBob meme where he's like doing this and you're like, oh, just don't reinforce and just, don't physically manage. I understand that for some kids, it's like when they're even hit this switch, they know y'all are SDs for restraint and they're going to go ahead and do the thing until you restrain them. I'm aware of some of that situations, and those are the moments where we say, if you're going to try to start this, you should try it in a new space with a new person and perhaps with some new synthesis of reinforcers. I think that a similar thing might apply here, where it's worth reconsidering who are the people that are going in there and that are trying to make this really, really enhanced reinforcing context in which we can teach the skills that we need to teach to move the sticks with this client. I like the way Eric said it. You put some nitro on that happy.
Yeah, we've had a bunch of kids like this where it's like, they're content, they're doing things that they like, but they're not, I don't think we would describe it as being happy. And that's really where we've trusted the process is there's more here. Some of the things that we've done and looked at is, are there activities that they had in their past that they really enjoyed that brought them a great sense of, of enjoyment that were taken away from them? Can we bring those things back? We've had like kids that are, 19, 20-year-old that we brought out a bubble machine and they're going nuts now. And we're getting there, but it's like, it really, that process pushes you out of what you think about that learner to really look at them differently and just continue to kind of work that process. But the end point is often different from the beginning. And then we've had other guys where it's just really much more of a focus on that rapport building, hanging out while they're doing the things that they like, slowly getting yourself involved. But I think for a lot of us in this field where we want to move quickly, that's hard. It's hard just to be in that environment, hang out, not put any expectations, but like, hey, I'm around you while you're doing your, the crap that you like. And eventually I'm going to edge myself in a little bit, and it's more of an exposure approach to getting involved in their life. And then you're going to figure out your ways in that window when they let that in, and some of it just takes a little bit of time. I think it's probably more difficult in an outpatient clinic environment than it is in a school. We have a lot of time to do that. We have environments that we can do that in. And that makes it easier for us on our end with that. But those are the things.
It's extra fun when, the tech has to have so many programs with data in order to get paid for that day.
That sucks, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm like making up all this stuff like, attends to this or we'll do this. And I'm like, take a data point on it just to give something to
right,
so that I can just do the process I need to do. And then there's just some data on some random act of compliance or cleaning up the toy that he threw across the room or something.
Yeah. That's it. Anybody, what do people do with for billing purposes? That's totally outside of my area. So, I would.
Yeah, extremely creative.
Yeah, Jill and I talked about this because we have to do the same thing. What can you get data on?
You guys write 4 goals on just cab 1. They're relinquishing, they're tolerating, they're just doing all types of things for 1 cab.
Yeah, I've done that too. This kid, I can't get anything out of him though, so I have to be super creative.
I really liked the thing that Eric just said about looking, expanding the scope of what may be reinforcing for the child and thinking maybe about are there things that, because this really does come up a lot, is that parents are like, well, we haven't let them play with that Game Boy in years because they were so naughty when we used to do it. And being like, can we get that back in here? That would make this awesome. If you think about the clients that we're talking about, highly language abled, they're usually very social. And it's a little strange that they're choosing to spend all their time with an iPad. I think it's a sign that people have burned them in the past, that people are untrustworthy. And they're like, just screw you. I'm just going to do this because I feel safe here. Like I'm addicted to my phone. I watch YouTube in the shower and I'm always on it, but I'm not. But I don't have trust issues with people where I'm able to do both and I'm able to. I think I might have just given you guys too TMI, so I'll just let the next question roll in. Who doesn't watch YouTube in the shower?
All about Netflix.
Only Shia
LaBeouf. Dithu graciously said he'll stay a little bit later, so I'm going to go to the next question. The next person is Kaylin. It's also her birthday, so happy birthday, Kaylin.
Hey, happy birthday, Kaylin.
You're muted.
Sorry, forgot to unmute myself. Thank you. So I know that the hangout and practice contexts need to be identical. And for one of my learners that we are having a lot of success with, they are in terms of the exact same activities, items, everything is exactly the same. They're all available. But what I'm noticing with him over time is that he's almost sort of delineating the 2 contexts. And so what he's doing in Hangout is now very different than what he's doing in practice. Have you seen this before? do you think there's anything to be concerned about?
Can you tell me more?
Sure. Yeah, so Hangout now tends to look much less social, a little more low key, there's engagement with electronics in both actually, but just less social, more low key. Practice is, a lot more amped, wanting a lot more, back and forth reciprocal play. And we have actually had whole days that we've not even gone to practice. We've spent them in Hangout doing that really amped play. But he's asking for practice when he's really amped. So,
okay. So the problem is that he's sometimes choosing to spend the entire day in Hangout.
No. Sorry, that didn't make sense. So he is now sort of a very different child in Hangout and practice. What's available is the same, but Hangout is, I want to be low key, don't really want to talk right now, just want to watch the iPad, leave me be. Practice has really become, I want some man compliance, we're going to make some videos together, all of that. And I tried just spending a few days in Hangout only, not even offering practice, where we did those, really like the man compliance and all of that, so that he understood, like, these are the same, they're both available.
I see.
But he's really asking for practice as soon as he kind of hits like that true max HRE. So yeah, I'm just wondering if I should be concerned.
So is he having a lot of problem behavior?
No.
No, and he's using Hangout judiciously? You're saying like every once in a while he goes there to kind of take a break?
So we start the day in Hangout, and then he's not opting out of practice, or very rarely opting out of practice. On those trials where maybe he, has some vocal protest, we will offer Hangout, and then he will go back. But he does tend to kind of spend the majority of the beginning of session in Hangout, and then the later half in practice.
Majority of the session.
Or not the majority of the beginning. The beginning is Hangout and then practice. He usually starts Hangout, goes to practice, and stays there.
So it sounds awesome, and it sounds like are you making the progress that you want to be making in practice?
It's slow. He's my learner he actually needs 8 to 10 minutes between trials. He's filming and editing videos. So awesome. Really it's really cool. But any shorter than that, he just gets annoyed. He's like, leave me the hell alone, So it's slow, but it's moving well. And as compared to the challenging behavior that he was having before, huge reductions.
Yeah. So that's what I want to first celebrate, is that's great. You've given him an out where he's not being forced to do stuff, yet you're still teaching him skills and he's still moving. He's progressing towards that. So that's actually really terrific. The fact that his behavior, his affect seems different isn't troublesome to me if you're saying that the same kind of things are programmed in either space. I think that actually might make sense. Like this is when I'm here, I'm with you, and it might be the fact that you are interacting with me that makes me want to interact with you back. And here I just go to take a break, cool off for a bit. So I don't see anything concerning about that, unless you were to say, oh, I don't know, like he wants to spend his entire day in Hangout. Then it might say something weird about maybe there's some pressure in the practice context for him to be interactive, but it doesn't sound like that's what you're programming either. It's that he's initiating all these things.
He is spending more time in practice than Hangout.
That's really great. And I think that I want to underscore that point. It goes back to think about the tactics that promote safety and that promote agency and promote autonomy on the front end, because that was, it's our clients that we put through the process that we're trying to get published spent 96% of their time in practice. So we weren't running into situations where we were like, oh gosh, he's in Hangout for 4 days on end. And when I really think about why that is, I think it's because we had made modifications to our treatment context, offering choices during cab chaining, being really proactive about what we're telling them we're going to do, and then going at that performance-based speed that just make kind of that space a little bit less aversive and something more worth, I'd say, more worth approaching.
How many more do you think you want to take, Dithu?
I'm here.
We'll all stay.
Let's go.
I'm sure some of us will stick it out. Victoria is next. I'm not sure who's still here, so hopefully Victoria is still around.
Oh, I'm still here. So I've been following SBT and stuff for a few years now, and I'm from Arizona. So very few other BCBAs that I come across in co-working in schools and stuff have I seen that. Most of my work right now is with intermediate and adult clients, and it's in home and private. My biggest challenge and my question here is, when you guys are running your program, have you run across challenges with parents being okay with a treatment that is more mild-mannered than what they believe should be happening? I have one client in particular, or a couple actually, where I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah, SBT and ECM would be perfect. But when I start to go over the treatment protocol after the ISCA, they're like, so you're telling me we're going to reinforce all these lower level behaviors and he gets to escape whenever he wants? And I don't want to be a part of that. That's not what we want, right? And getting that parent compliance and getting them to buy in and like selling the treatment package when I know it will work, right? I've done it before. It's amazing. How am I getting that buy-in, and what success have you guys had to get that buy-in to parents and staff included? Exactly. RBTs have been RBTs for 20 years, and this is how we've always done it. Push that extinction. How do I get that buy-in?
Yeah, man, I definitely don't have the answer to that. I might be able to offer an answer to that. It's a tricky one. There's a lot of factors here. I like to kind of take a look at what's going on right now in the background and baseline. Is this a kid that's in crisis? Are you guys physically managing?
Yeah, the one primarily that I have a little guy. I don't think I'll ever get the mom. He headbangs quite a lot. Now it started to happen in school, and he's headbanging pretty hard. And their thing is they want to put a helmet on him. And why am I not advocating for restraint and helmet placement? And so that's one. Another one, I have a few whose parents just are difficult to buy in. Another one is a 17-year-old where parents are thinking about, if he aggresses one more time, they're going to call crisis again, and they're going to just like get rid of him and move him out of their house. And I'm like, but wait,
Yeah, that's really tricky. I think that one of my favorite lessons that I've learned from my time with Dr. Hanley was that he really taught me what applied means and applied behavior analysis when Beowulf and Risley wrote it in 1968. And he kind of taught me that applied means that we follow the lead of the complainant, the person who's giving the complaint. And so you know what I'm saying? Like if the parents are like, we want to restrain and put mechanical restraints and helmets on this, there's one argument to be made that we should listen to them because that's what they want. I don't think that that's what anybody here is satisfied with. I don't think that that's what anybody here wants to hear.
I don't go home all nice and fuzzy with that. I mean, I do. I mean, hey, that's what they want, and that's what we're doing, and we'll use the language that they want and everything like that. Yeah. But at the end of the day, am I giving ethical and effective treatment protocols because I'm not actually teaching him any replacement behaviors or tolerance to anything? We're really putting out that fire. Right. Mm-hmm. So as this child gets older, what does that look like? And really, I'm just wondering if you have any tricks in terms of selling pitches, pamphlets, leaflets. I've got all the FT pamphlets and stuff like that, and just really some selling pitches for, how do I get them to my side of the table?
Yeah, it's funny because we usually are the bad guys as behavior analysts, and the parents are like, why are you doing all that stuff? But in this case, you're the one that's like, I'd rather be gentler, and they're like, no, screw that, be meaner. So okay,
they're like, you're just letting him get away with that behavior. Like I have a mom where he's like punching her, and I'm like, well, okay, when he starts to get mad and growl at you, prompt him through his language. And she's like, no, he needs to know better. And I'm like, okay, sure.
Yeah. I want to give a little quick nod to Greg in the chat who's saying I use the ACT matrix. I think that ACT, I'm not anywhere near an expert, but I think that ACT has some really relevant literature to talking about basically values-based decision-making. And so I think that the first step is to talk about goals. If the goal is for the child to no longer have problem behavior, and you can both agree on that, then you've already made progress. You agree on one thing. That's cool. Now there's maybe two divergent paths. There's a way in which you could eliminate problem behavior, but it's putting this kid in splints in a helmet. And I think it's fair to say that maybe we don't have a ton of data, but I have worked with, I'd say at least 30 children who at one point they were put in restraints, splints, helmets, what have you, and it stayed with them for the duration of me knowing them, and it will likely stay with them later in life. So there's a huge risk, there's a huge cost to putting kids in restraints. It might mitigate, but you also, as a behavior analyst, have the power to teach them how that's not, in fact, effectively dealing with the behavior. It's not, in fact, providing a means of reinforcement, all that jazz. But furthermore, it's denigrating their quality of life in a major way. So to me, that's perhaps a second bit of conversation that might help tip the scales toward a skill-based approach. Not even, forget enhanced choice. We're still talking about, can I teach your child skills as opposed to just wrapping them up like the mummy? It all starts with the conversation about values. And sometimes I find that when you have the conversation about values and when you can empathize with what they're going through, then it's like, it's a weird digression. But has anybody read Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince? Victoria, are you familiar with that universe?
Yes, of course.
You remember how he needed to convince Horace Slughorn to give him that thing, right?
Yes.
So he drinks the lucky potion, and then there's like 2 chapters of them just chatting before he finally asks, like, and wouldn't that be better for both of us? And then the guy gives it. That's what I want you to do.
It's a slow process. It's totally a slow process.
I want you to spend 2 chapters talking about values, talking about empathizing with what they need, and then talking about here's the path that we can go down. We can go down a path of restraint, mechanical restraint that will be a lifestyle, because he will not have taught this child how to cope and be resilient in an ever-changing and a difficult world. By contrast, we can embrace this process where there's going to be a little BS in the beginning. I'm going to give into his problem behavior. I'm going to do this, but I promise you that I'm going to empower him with skills that render that problem behavior unnecessary. I'm going to enable him to effectively navigate a difficult world that will ultimately lead to a greater quality of life.
I'm just going to give him Harry Potter. That's what I'm going to give him.
I think we just got to drink that Felix Felicis or whatever it is.
Yeah. You can buy it.
Yeah.
But good luck.
Another example, I'm so sorry to do this, but if you watch The Office season 2, they take this person out, Tim Meadows, for dinner, and they're trying to sell him. But Michael Scott does a lot of stuff where he's like, we're not going to ask it yet. We're still building trust here. We're going to make this person sell to us, right? He spends that whole episode, Jan's ready to pull the trigger, and he's like, wait, not yet. And then when the EO is hottest, he says, wouldn't you like to consider this agreement? So I clearly don't have the correct answer here, but I have pop culture references that might.
No, totally. And I get selling ABA sometimes is part of the package. Because what we're doing is so different than our typical DR procedures, right? And I think some families are so used to those, and practitioners and other BCBAs as well, especially out here in Arizona. I don't run into a lot of people doing this. I've run into no one, let's be honest. Some people at AZ ABA, but it's so weird to them, and just getting them to come along for the ride. All right, it's going to look weird in the beginning, but trust me, it's going to be so good when we get there.
Yeah, I think that's it. We all took that leap of faith when we joined this field. We all were hesitant to take on a new approach until we, in some ways, saw it effective. I'm not kidding you. I was like arguing with Dr. Hanley in his office when he said, let's do this enhanced choice stuff. Because I was like, that's not how I was trained to do things. But it wasn't until you saw the outcome of it, the trust that Hillary's talking about. You trust the process and you surprise yourself, and your clients surprise you as well. So I say that to say, I understand when parents are like, no, that doesn't sound like it's going to work. But small gains are important. The best way to convince parents is to show them how effective their kid can be and how effective you can be. But I understand that we're having a different conversation about how do I even get the process started.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
There's also, in addition to this hangout, there was a hangout we did. It's in the media files in the group, where we had a 25-minute conversation. It's the one that Dr. Hanley himself came to and talked about how to get buy-in. And it was an incredible conversation. And I highly recommend you go listen to it, because there's some great tips there as well. And I just want to add my 2 cents, because in the home environments I've been in where this has been a real issue, really compartmentalizing when we are doing SBT and making it completely separate. So business as usual outside, and then also maybe helping the parents in the way that they want, and having our treatment be separate has been really helpful to get us going, because then they do get to see what it looks like.
I've done that part as well sometimes, but I do like parents to kind of watch. And then like sometimes, like you guys alluded to before, having that different environment, and the kiddo is super, super aggressive, breaking everything in the house, and just having that completely different clinic environment and doing that as well. Unfortunately, some of my clients are in rural areas where a lot of my supervision, because they're so rural, like 3 or 4 hours away from me, that it is a lot of telehealth with the RBT.
Sure.
Getting it just because the area is so rural. But I 100% agree.
And is residential treatment an option?
Some residential treatment be the option. I think for that one older kiddo I referenced, residential might be the thing. Mom's parenting is so authoritative and so habitual that the service that we even differential reinforcement isn't being tolerated. So eventually, as she calls crisis over and over, residential is an option. And I've been able to do some great residential placements and then train residential staff. Out here, our developmental disabilities unit in the state will actually pay for residential homes for these kiddos. And they're actually just homes, right? They're homes with like 3 clients, and I'll have providers 24 hours a day. And so that's awesome. None of them are trained to deal with our clients. So we have to go in and have substantial support in the first transition, but usually it goes really well.
I bet. Yeah. Particularly relative to what you're dealing with right now. I mean, it sounds like, once you hit one of those end roads where you like can't move anymore with it, certainly a card that you could play with it as potential, or even to get them to move, is having a conversation around, what do you think about this? Or what would be, what would suggest that your son would be ready for a move like this, or not move? What do we need to do to keep him out of that kind of placement? You get all kind of funky things once you go down that route. But it sounds like you're really, have your back against the door there.
Fun times.
I'm in a super similar situation. I totally understand where you're coming from.
One thing that has helped me, it's kind of hard to do, but I had when I'm selling parents, I use the trade win videos. I show them those, but I have a couple parents that kids are pretty impacted, that they will, with permission, talk to the other parents about the process. If they're not bought in, just because I was running into that too with some, and it's not even that they're just not bought in. I sometimes think even when I wasn't doing the SBT, it's like I didn't even explain as much as you. I'm just like, hey, I'm gonna come in here and do stuff. But with SBT, I feel like, oh, now I'm gonna explain everything to you. And I find, and I think that's really interesting. Like I feel like I do way more prep work when when I wasn't doing SBT. I didn't do as much prep work, but I didn't go as into detail as I do. And as you go into more detail, you get more questions. So the videos have always helped me. So parents can kind of see like, hey, this is how it might look. Look at all this cool stuff.
Yeah.
So rock and roll.
That's super great. I put the SCF videos in my parent flyer when we're talking about it, and I'm offering it to them. I asked them to go and watch the videos. And then, some of the flyers FTF has kind of put out, and other units that are doing it, that are putting up in here, right? Taking some of the great resources from here. Right now I'm trying to get insurance to approve for some of these cases a parent social parenting group to throw them all into, because peer-to-peer training is sometimes more effective. Again, I have to wait for funding for that, but I am trying to do that. So those are all really great suggestions.
Super good stuff. The next person with the question is Evelyn. She's still here.
Thank you all for staying. This is fun. I'm having a great time.
Me too. I'm so HRE. Evelyn, I'm gonna move on if I don't hear from Evelyn. All right, Katie, you're up. Katie Loring.
Can I just say one quick thing about that conversation that just went down, because I'm thinking about it. I learned from Dr. Hanley about how to define an applied science, but I also want to stress that has defined my work as a researcher. Is I have you might say it's a privilege, but I'm in a position where I wait till parents come to me desperate for help, or I work with a school where they're nominating their most problematic kids. So I say that just as a mea culpa, or I didn't use that right. I say that to say I am not in a position where I am routinely going and trying to convince people to do these models when they're satisfied. And if I can be completely honest, there are settings in Maryland, close to where I work, where they're happy doing things the way that they're doing them. And I'm not knocking down their door, telling them that I want to do things my way, because I understand that that's an uphill battle. And like, that's not where my reinforcers are. So the fact that
totally
Shane
agree.
and Eric are here and telling you about the ways that they've gone about it is such so many degrees better advice than what I could possibly offer. I just have lip service on this. So I just want
I think by the time, and that's the same for us too, even in home. I mean, I do some ECA stuff too, but even at home, when we're talking about the kids that are over age 10 and those bigger kids, usually you get called because they're in crisis.
Mm-hmm.
But changing and resistance to change is a thing, right? You ever had to read that? Who moved my cheese? And getting that piece and moving it slowly. Meanwhile, knowing that this kid is getting crisis calls and possibly may even end up hospitalized before you get to parent buy-in, that's the travesty that I'm trying to like avoid, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you're like, hey guys, how can we get this going before we end up in the hospital? Because, you know, I never like transitioning my children out of hospitals. It's just not my favorite thing.
Yeah, totally. Okay, I'm so sorry I interrupted someone's question.
Katie Lauren, you're up.
Here we go. Thanks, guys. I had a question in regards to reinforcement intervals and how to set boundaries when certain types of play or reinforcement are not necessarily an R1 or R2, but fall into some shades of gray. So we have one kid who he is hitting puberty, and so some of his alone time, he wants to have alone time at the clinic, and that is he wants to self-touch, which in a residential setting or a different setting may be appropriate, but we have to set some boundaries in some ways. And then I have another kid who is really adamant to fix people's clothing a certain way, like hook my jacket sleeve over my thumbs in a just so type of way that interferes with other people's ability to do their sessions or take off their jacket on a hot day kind of stuff. So where do you set a boundary in HRE or in reinforcement time or hangout time, maybe not hangout time, but reinforcement time, if that's a highly reinforcing activity for that kid?
Sure. So I'll do the self-touching stuff second, because I don't have a good answer for that, and I don't know that any of us do, other than to just try to, to offer it at a time and place where it's appropriate. Try to, exhaust children. The other thing, are you talking about like sexualized touch toward other people, or it's just that they're in your space?
No, he if our sleeves are pulled up over on our arms, he'll insist on pulling them down. Mm-hmm. We have a few RBTs who wear hats during their session, and he insists that some of them take that off. We lost one therapist because he would try to adjust her reading glasses or take them off, and he eventually broke them. And then there's another therapist here who he wants her sleeves all the way pushed up, and now it's cold. And so he'll escalate into his R1s.
When those things are denied.
So we taught him to communicate, sleeves up, sleeves down, and actually kind of took a skills-based training approach to it, like first, and then teach him to tolerate the denial delay. But I'm wondering where am I being too permissive in terms of inappropriate play?
None of those sound too permissive to me. That sounds like beautiful HRE. It sounds like him controlling his environment and being taught that he's in charge when he's in charge. But I especially appreciate that second part that you said, that we are actively working on it as a context where he needs to learn some tolerance. Like, that's not how life works. Right. And he does need to get to a point where you're able to say, it's cold, so no. But But I really think that that you get to that point by setting up your HRE and really teaching him how effective he can be with just appropriate behavior by pulling your sleeve down and up. And I think that I'd go as far as to say, get people that are going to be the most comfortable with that.
Okay.
Oh, hi, Eric. Get people who are going to be the most comfortable with it. Get people to maybe wear clothing where that might be mitigated or minimized. But you know, keeping a hat on, saying I don't want to wear a hat, so I shouldn't wear a hat, to me isn't reason enough to say nope, that's not allowed. Like we talk about hard nose in SBT and in reinforcement. I'm saying like you can't go into a pool if there's no water or if it's filled with ice or something like that. Like that's a hard no. But pulling my sleeve down, I'm okay with that. Or I would try to find somebody who is okay with that, because think about like the pairing that's going on there. Like they're learning that this person, that Katie is cool and she lets me pull her sleeves up and down. But Katie also sometimes challenges me and teaches me that I need to be okay when her sleeves are up. But we do that under controlled conditions, you know, and I get to earn that sort of happy, relaxed, engaged. So it's my opinion that those are absolutely reasonable things to do to control the environment, but that maybe there are ways to literally kind of to put on different clothes that might be like less aversive if he does stuff like that.
Okay, just to kind of set it up.
Yeah, you know, and then let's take this to its logical end. If he's trying to take off your shirt or something like that, that's a no, and it's it's a hard no, right? And that's the kind of thing that you got to signal with your verbal behavior. Or, you know, make it to the extent that if he's saying, I want to go walk into the middle of that freeway, you would say, that is not happening. We can do these other things. And if he's saying, I want some teacher to take their clothes off, you would say, we are not doing that, but you can play with this. And you also have these 10 other reinforcers, including my love and attention and compliance that I will offer you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome.
I have a case like that too. And so does Beth. They're separate cases, but we talk about this a lot where the line is drawn and it's hard sometimes.
I tend to be really permissive. I'm like, yeah, sure, you can jump on the table. We'll figure it out. And, you know, like you're saying, kind of. So, you know, we'll figure it out.
It's like a good conversation to have, because it's the question is how permissive is too permissive. Too permissive is that they're driving a car and they're 8 years old and they, you know what I mean? Like that too permissive is when there's a very real risk of danger or sexual harassment, things of that sort. But I think the whole point is in order to expand our repertoire to create the most reinforcing environment possible so that we can use that motivational distance to teach the skills that we want, which are skills relevant to this particular context. I think it's defensible to say that in reinforcement, we're going to let this dude unfold and fold our sleeves.
But it's uncomfortable. It feels weird to do those things. Yeah. The next person of the question is Joy, but actually Erin. She put it in the chat. I don't know, Erin, if you're on and you want to talk. Your chat is way back. I think it was about a child who won't pick practice and is like, whatever, I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
Oh, Joy,
I'm here. Hi. So, yeah, it has to do with one of our clients that we have here, trauma and depression. And we've been doing the enhanced choice model with him, and he's perfectly content in the hangout. We have a hard time getting him motivated to practice. He never chooses to practice. So we may be in like 2 weeks of hangouts, and we're like, okay, what are we doing wrong here that he's never wanting to practice his skills? So yeah, that's our question. How do we kind of get him motivated? What tactics do you guys have so that, you know, he may choose practicing his skills?
Yeah, great question. So was he ever choosing practice or just no? Does he have any of the skills?
Since we changed into the enhanced choice model, he's more likely to choose hangout than practicing his skills. Kind of the other things that we were doing before we moved to this model, he was in a sense practicing his skills, but we were seeing a lot of problem behaviors. So it wasn't the best way to go. And that's why we chose to switch over to this model.
Okay.
For him.
Yeah. Okay. That's an interesting position to be in. Maybe I should have said this early in the chat, but now no better time than the present. I think that we want to be careful when we do this as a Band-Aid, and I understand why you did it as a reactive measure, but it's now we're in a particularly precarious spot where it's like we basically taught you that maybe we've done this. I don't believe that we've done this, but you taught them that because you had enough problem behavior in here, we're going to set up this space, and that's maybe a weird contingency, but I'm not too worried about it. I think does this kid have strong language skills?
Yes, he does.
Okay, so he's able to tell
verbally
you.
Communicate, yes.
And does he tell you what he doesn't like about practice?
Yes, he does.
He does.
He says that there
things?
are when he is practicing his skills, certain subjects, they're too hard for him. You know, and he tells us that, and that's like why he doesn't want to do them and everything like that. So
okay, so does that mean that you've made it out to cab chaining with this client in practice?
Well, in a sense, we haven't set up cabs for him because we're still learning how to do the enhanced choice model. And so when we get to the practicing skills, the work that we have for him, you know, he has the opportunity to work like a subject or so, or coping skills that we're working on, but we haven't framed it yet in a way where they are particularly cab set out.
Okay, I think I follow that. The fact that he is vocalizing his displeasure with the practice context is great because it gives you an opportunity to remediate that situation with him. There are 5 principles of trauma-informed care. Well, there's more, but I'd like to talk about 5 that are particularly relevant to treatment of children with problem behavior who have experienced trauma. And one of them is all about collaboration and promoting choice and shared governance.
Okay.
So for a kid who's experienced in that room something kind of shitty, and now they're choosing to be in this room because it's better. First of all, let's celebrate the fact that does that mean that when he's in hangout, he's not having severe problem behavior?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So first of all, we want to celebrate that you've at least found a context where there's enough trust that he's not blowing up your spot. That's good news. If that room is aversive for some reason, to me, it's a sign that there's something about the treatment procedures that might need a little bit of adjusting, right? Okay. Because again, like I mentioned, we did this with 5 kids, and 5 out of 5 of them chose to come into practice 96% of the time, and that's because despite the fact that we were putting EOs in place, it was a highly engaging, fun environment, and we never went a step beyond what the kid was ready for. So I suppose my recommendation is this: if he has the hangout space and that's all good, I would try to set up a new space as best you can, a different context in which to do practice. And I want you to, whoever has great rapport with him or whoever is somebody that he trusts, tell him that you fucked up. Tell him that you pushed him too hard, and that you gamed him, you made him feel like a chump, you did all this stuff. I want you to make him feel like you wronged him, and you're there to just repent for your sins. And I want you to basically say, listen, I really do like that room. I like practicing with you because I want you to have skills so that you can be successful in your life. Right. And instead of framing it like, I want you to do this for me, maybe consider framing it like, I want you to do this for you. So you're telling me, like, you're giving me the data right there that you're saying math is hard, so you don't like doing it. I agree. Math is hard for me too. I'm lying. I'm really good at math, by the way. I did Kumar as a kid, but math is hard for me too. But I really think that you have what it takes to be good at math, and I want to help you get there. So here's what we're gonna do. We're not gonna go into that crappy room. Here's this other room, and guess what? Today we're not even gonna look at the math homework today. We're actually just gonna practice using our words whenever I bother you, because I'm realizing that I bother you a lot too. And I'm sure that ticks you off, pisses you off, whatever he's comfortable language wise. And I think that's essentially, you, rather than be a therapist, rather than be an analyst, a technician, you become a coach, you become a guru, you become a Peloton instructor. Have any of you been on Peloton?
No.
I
I
know
don't
this
even
is-
know what that is.
It's
I don't even know
it's
what
like
that is.
this like extraordinarily expensive bike, and the only reason I know about it is because we have a couple in the apartment that I live in, so I get a free membership. I don't know if they're wise to that yet.
No.
There is an instructor on Peloton whose name is Robin, and she literally embodies enhanced choice in everything that she does. And every step of the way, she says, this thing might be hard, and I'm going to ask you to go up to a 60 today, but if you just want to do a 30, then I still am proud of you, and I still think that you're so amazing for coming to this bike today, kind of thing. And you're like, oh, screw that, I'm going 60. You're like, you're like, thank you for giving me the out. Thank you for telling me that this is hard, for empathizing with me, and thank you for giving me some control. She's like, you can go 30, you can go 40, you can go 50, you can go 60. So how does that translate to this situation? Maybe you ask him to, you truly set up the treatment context with him. Say, what are the things that you think you might want to work on? And then you design basically the process backwards from that. So he might say, I don't really want to work on math or something like that, and say like, well, I know that you're going to go to school one day and they're going to want you to do math. So I don't want that to be hard for you or aversive for you. I want you to kick ass at that math. So let's work on math. But today we're truly just working on saying my way. Does that make sense at what I'm describing?
It does. It makes a lot of sense. And it gives us a different perspective on how to address it, because we haven't gone that route yet. We kind of touched on a little bit, but then it's all new. But we haven't. So thank you for your tactics and your advice. We really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. I think that if I can stress a couple of main points there,
Yeah.
it's hard to know. Well, I think that you did ultimately do the right thing by adding Hangout later on, because it resulted in suppression of problem behavior, and that's really first and foremost amazing. And it does sound like, in fact, if we can behaviorally define trust, it sounds like trust increased as a function of you doing that. So that's all good. I want you to ride that train and basically continue to establish trust by tacting that you messed up in that room.
Okay.
By tacting that maybe you messed up as the therapist. So you're going to try it. Maybe you'll try it with a different therapist. Dr. Hanley he'll go as far as to say new context, new person, maybe some new stimuli too, just so you can establish some fresh kind of stimulus control. But I really love this concept of shared governance. I'm learning more about it as I read the trauma-informed literature, and it's so in line with Mont Wolf's idea of social validity. It's so in line with Dr. Hanley has a paper that came out in 2010 that's called Toward Effective and Preferred Programming, and it's all about how we can engage our clients, the recipients of behavior change services, in their own therapy, how they can have control over what they do. And he talks about kids with very little language and how you can set up a concurrent chains arrangement to get them to tell you what their preferences are. But all of that stuff is highly relevant to this too. I want to set up a context where first and foremost, you want to come in the door tomorrow.
Yeah.
So some of the steps we can do is like, you tell me what we should work on, and you tell me what pace we should go at. And yes, adult-led time is still freaking adult-led time. Like the EO is still Joy's in charge, but that doesn't mean that it needs to be draconian and miserable. It can be adult-led time that sometimes actually may be fun for the client or something of this sort.
Okay. Well, thank you.
You're very welcome.
This is so amazing. Beth, you're next.
Hi. So I have this tiny little mostly theoretical question, and I feel like you may have partially answered it earlier, but I still really want to explore the conversation. If my understandings are correct about enhanced choice specifically, the primary difference between Hangout and practice is the yearn to earn in practice. And
is the presence of a contingency, a reinforcement contingency, you could say.
Right. Yes. Sorry, wasn't very technical and say yes. Exactly.
No, but it's the same way. I don't know why I did that. You're right. You said
that's okay. No. Define it in a way that we have a shared language. That is good. So something that I have spent probably too much time really thinking about is the fact that so for a lot of kids, obviously technology, video games, whatever it might be, technology-based things, may themselves create a contingency-based activity where that yearn to earn is present. And what I have wondered is if some of the challenges that people have, and like, and you know, I've had, like, I don't have a really specific situation where this is occurring now, but I absolutely see the potential for it to occur, is if the kid is getting reinforcement, because the technology is delivering that, it's delivering, they yearn to earn, right? Like they are yearning to earn. And like, I think about my, you know, 25-year-old nephew who is typically developing and doesn't have behavior challenges, but like the earning he does when he plays video games, like that reinforcement is so powerful. What I wonder is, like, do we have the potential for Hangout, like if Hangout and practice are exactly the same, if Hangout itself creates a contingency sort of situation for that to not be like an effective way to, like, might we have kids not choose practice because they're earning so much in Hangout?
Yeah.
Is this something that anybody has explored, or do you have thoughts about it?
I guess I have some thoughts. I think it's important that we, again, go back to who are we doing this process for? And as far as I can tell, ISCA and skill-based treatment are for kids with socially mediated problem behavior. And as far as I can tell, yes, getting access to an iPad from an adult is a socially mediated event, of course. But you're so right. There's so much embedded and contingent reinforcement in an iPad that maybe just having it means they might use it all day. However, I go back to this notion that when we're trying to build our initial teaching context, our reinforcement context, that we don't settle for just one iPad in a room, despite the fact that that might be sufficient to keep problem behavior at bay. It's the and model, not the or model, that would encourage me to make that practice context more valuable than the iPad could be alone. So maybe that means we interact with the person while they're playing a game. Maybe we bring in another iPad and there's some interaction going on there. It might give you something with which to do that. Another thought that I'm having, to summarize that thought, it's the notion that there are more contingencies and more reinforcers and more things to play with that ideally would allocate responding to that practice context. But you're totally right. They might still just say, you know what, screw. And actually, and I think this also connects to sort of what Jill was asking earlier about, it's like, if the iPad is the only thing that's valuable to them, then we haven't done our homework enough to know about the context, or perhaps we have something aversive about the way we go about interacting with the kid while they're doing iPad or whatever.
So I think, and you did touch on it a bit earlier, but I think you are saying that it is okay for there to be some amount of differential reinforcement between the two contexts.
I like want to say that it has happened. I don't want to put that out there and say Dithu signed off on this. No. because everything that I have learned since then, especially in learning from that FTF group that's continuing to consult so much, is that we can do so many more things before we even introduce the Hangout room in the first place,
right, that
promote trauma-informed care, promote safety, and what might help kids go through the process in an errorless manner. That's what we're talking about here, right? Like we're talking about kids that want to choose treatment. Yes, Hangout is one tactic that allows us to, in a sense, really see that they're choosing to come here versus there. But all these other tactics that we've been talking about are also things to consider that might get kids to want to come through that door the next day. So yes, those are some things. Another thing that I am thinking about, though, is like, if after all that you've tried to get kids to be more engaged than just one iPad at a time, I'm like thinking about all the gamers that I know that in quarantine, like, were really happy for a long time. And I'm just talking anecdotes here, but like after a while, even they got tired of the video games. I think I've been through Netflix's entire library. Even I thought that my EO would never run out, but like even I am sometimes sick of just solitary, sedentary activity. And video games are different because you're engaging with it. But I think I don't have any better advice than to just say that I do trust that synthesizing reinforcers and help bring kids to that practice space.
Synthesizing them, I like push back a little bit, like synthesizing them in the practice context in a way that has some difference than how they are might be synthesized in the hangout. Like, I think that's what I'm like theoretically struggling with is like, yes, absolutely. Like, do your homework in advance, pair them with things. Like, it's a synthesized context. But if I understand right, like, you should offer the synthesized context in both, right?
Yeah.
Right. And I thought that I heard Dr. Hanley say once, and I can't remember where, that like it was okay if the attentional quality in practice was slightly better. Is that an accurate statement? I remember where I thought I heard that. It's like
it's gonna happen.
Okay.
It's gonna happen because let me give a simple example. When we go to reinforce the mand, we're elevated often in our cadence and our tone. And if that mand isn't ever occurring, we're not necessarily just sitting there being like, oh my God, did you just sit by yourself for another 5 minutes? No, but we are like, you know, the function of Hangout is so that there's always a space that will not be further evocative that can exist. So on another level, you could conceptualize it as, I want it to have the enough reinforcement and an absence of enough EOs such that problem behavior is very low probability in that space. In this, we're talking about contingencies, social contingencies. We're talking about interacting with people and dynamic interactions where our own behavior is producing more than just resume access to this iPad, but it's also producing the ability to get a person to get out of your face, to tell them that you're doing a great job. So those are what I'm talking about as synthesized events that just that are still programmed in the Hangout space. You're still going to give them attention. You're still going to tell them that they're awesome. But here it's going to follow their own behavior in a you know, it hangs into the contingency. And so by its very nature, it might be structurally, topographically a little bit different.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Is that a political enough answer to that question?
Beautiful. Thanks.
I don't think I missed anyone. I think I have a question, but I want to let other people have an opportunity if I missed anyone in the chat. I don't think I did. Okay. I'm not sure. Go ahead.
I just want to, one more time, like I'm probably seem so weird by being like, I don't know about that, when we clearly did have cases for whom there was differential consequences in Hangout versus practice. I want you to keep in mind, if you're trying to plan this for a client that's coming through the door, that ideally you're thinking of a client for whom, if you were to fuck with them in that way, it wouldn't be good for them. It would not be therapeutic for your rapport and for your relationship, but it might in fact be negative. So that's really the spirit behind our reservation to make these two spaces different.
Yeah.
Do we need more research on how different they can be before a breaking point? You betcha. And I'm looking forward to that. But you know, all of these things are future research is needed. But when it comes to things where we can just say, well, I don't believe the data, I like to think about the cost benefit analysis of it as it relates to, you know what I mean? Like the tactics that promote safety. I don't think we need a peer-reviewed study for each thing. Well, we have them, by the way, but I don't think we need to have the epic vetting that we might need to say, I would rather choose an option that is safe as opposed to an option that will definitely result in escalation. That's why I'm all about all these tactics that promote safety that I've been espousing today.
And that's why I harped on it too, because in my early ECM experience, we did change the conditions and it was negative. And so I carry that with me all the time, not wanting to contact that again, because I want my ECM kids to choose their Hangout if they need it.
Okay, if I can, sorry, not to call out anybody in the thing, but if I can point to Frank. Frank, would you mind sharing a little bit about CH, that kiddo? Do you remember how we did some of these things and he was so wise to it?
I do. Yeah, I was going to talk about, I was actually opting to hang out this whole Zoom presentation. But...
Sorry, I brought you into practice.
Yeah, you know, and I think another point that I think isn't often brought up, and something we experience in my clinic a lot, when we start these processes straight off a referral and we get the kid in the door and we get them right in, we launch them right into reinforcement, we tend to move along a lot quicker. And I think one thing with CH is that there was a history tied to some of these rooms, and there was a history tied to adults being slick and gaming him. And I think that was a big barrier that we had to work through. And obviously you and Max worked very closely. But I think
So sorry, if I could just really quickly give the story. There was a kid who was starting to choose Hangout pretty consistently. So we made a decision to say like, well, let's just reserve the clinic iPad, I think it was, gateway for.
It was actually the clinic switch.
Right.
Yeah.
So we reserved that for practice. And he was like, you know what I have to say about that? I'm not going into practice. I'll tell you that much for free. Like he really didn't like that. They did that.
Yeah. And I think there was, and we always went round and round and we would talk about it. I mean, obviously Max would work with you and then he would talk to me about it. And I know that there was a whole lot of history that I think we were working against. But I mean, I think he appreciated the fact, I mean, this is a kid, to give you a little background, we kind of have this atrium model where it's like we will get kids who are either going into a hospital or that a hospital will discharge a child into a program, and then we kind of provide that support. And he was one of those being discharged out of a hospital. And this was when we first had him, months and months of severe problem behavior all session. And I think to get to a point where we built a level of trust just because he appreciated that we would drop in, like almost like he enjoyed this check-in. Like, hey, do you want to come practice? Do you want to come hang out? And it's really hard to describe, and it sounds very unanalytical. But I think that is where we built our trust. And I think he enjoyed practice ultimately because of the what we're talking about is it's almost like the fear of spiders. If you're in Hangout, spiders can still exist. If you're in practice, you can remove spiders whenever you need to. And ultimately, I think he did gravitate towards practice because he felt that he had a level of control, over these. He did, throughout the time after the process, as he's more comfortable with us talking, he has opened up about things like, I don't want to do this stuff, like almost in a sense communicating to us that he knows that there's a better way and he wants to opt for that. And I think it was just kind of really meeting him where he was at. And to let you know, Dithu, he's doing great nowadays.
Oh, that's amazing. So yeah. That was great. Thank you, Frank. And I think that that's the memory that will stick with me for a long time, was that we made that change because we thought it would help. What was our goal? We wanted him to come to practice more, and it resulted in him for a couple weeks, I think, saying, actually, I don't want to do either Hangout or practice, or like, I'll come here, but there's no way I'm going in that practice room. So it was the exact client who we're talking about, combative, oppositional trauma history. We didn't want to touch him or anything, but he knew that we were trying to game him. So that's why I'm really hesitant to recommend it. Thanks, Frank.
Yeah, for sure. Sorry if I didn't if I didn't touch on the point. I know you guys have gotten into it, but
totally just put you on the spot. So it's
all right.
It's helpful to hear the real applied examples because they're not usually represented in the research articles. So I really appreciate that because I've had a similar experience, and that's what my question is. So when it comes to cases with significant trauma history or ongoing trauma, and that is interfering with treatment, in your experience, and it sounds like possibly Frank's experience too, who else do you think should be at the table when you're going through treatment? And if you need to advocate for things, what should you be advocating for specifically?
Great question. Frank, you looked like you had a response at strength.
Yeah, well, you can go ahead, and if anybody else has one, go right ahead.
I don't know the answer to, as to who else should be there. I'm working currently on a project with some colleagues, including Dr. Hanley, on talking about trauma-informed care. And I think what we are seeing is that a lot of people have written a lot of shit about trauma-informed care. A lot of people are like, we should be doing this. The homelessness literature has it. The battered women shelter literature has it. Social work literature has it. Medical literature has it. Everybody has literature saying these are principles of trauma-informed care, and here's how we should be putting them into practice. Everybody, like, is down with the idea, but there's so little empirical data, there's so little efficacy data, and nobody has a good behavioral definition of what we're talking about when we talk about trauma as either as the traumatic event or the traumatic response. Like when it comes to a behavior analytic conceptualization, it's really hard to talk about. When I think about the kids that I know are these trauma candidates, it's usually that there's some sort of highly aversive stimulus that results in highly problematic behavior. And it appears as though it's elicited, although it really gets into that fuzzy boundary between respondent and operant behavior. Yeah, I see Greg saying respondent conditioning. We know, well, we infer that those are parts of the problem. What everybody says is that we should do these preventative things to try to avoid re-traumatization. And those things are to promote, establish safety and trust. Cool. We're good people. We're well equipped to do that. To promote choice. We're well equipped to do that. To what else? Share governance, like I mentioned. We can work toward doing that. And then emphasize skill building. That's like an important part, that every single person needs to know that they can be empowered to overcome their trauma, whatever it is. Like these are little snippets from various parts of literature. My point in saying that is that we are absolutely the best equipped to emphasize skill building when it comes to overcoming trauma. However, we certainly haven't proven that we can do that. So I think that when it comes to who can we get to the table, I think it's people that are down with trauma-informed care to an extent, right? If you have an SLP who's like these parents that are like, no, I would rather restrain than give in, then we don't want that person on our team trying to design a trauma-informed intervention, I don't think.
Oh.
By contrast, if you have an OT who's like, I'll do feeding intervention, but I am not doing that non-removal of the spoon shit. You know, I'm going to be, I only like these gentle sensory approaches. That's like, I think of them as like allies. Mm. And Hillary, I could be so obtuse and wrong about this, that there might be people that are like trauma experts, but from what I think I understand, being an expert in trauma means you know how to avoid re-traumatizing. That is, you know how to remove the stimuli that might in any way evoke or elicit trauma behavior. So if there's a PBIS person in your school personnel, I think let's invite them back to the table. In the 90s, we kicked them out of ABA, and let's say, please come back. We're sorry, we care now. And we can't remove history. Actually, Greg, that's amazing. We can't remove it, but we can change their interaction with those stimuli. And in doing that, it's I think that behavior analysts can be so glib when we talk about trauma and when we oversimplify it and we just say it's just escape maintained or avoidance maintained problem behavior. But in another sense, as far as we understand what the traumatic event is, it is an aversive stimulus. And we understand that our relationship with those stimuli can change and that we can build kind of skills that might help us navigate those aversive experiences in life.
Can I be a little bit more explicit?
Yeah, did I just ramble for 20 minutes? I'm sorry.
I love it. No, this is great. I'm thinking of a specific situation where sometimes like we can ensure safety most of the time, but sometimes we can't. And what we're encountering is actually, from a psychology background, you would say that this child is recreating their trauma. So there's no known EO, we can't necessarily pinpoint what's happening that caused this to go off. But it goes off, and it's extremely concerning what happens when it happens, and it's incredibly sad. And I feel really well equipped to deal with everything else, but when it comes to being the victim in the role play of their trauma, it feels out of my lane. And so who do I need to have when I go and advocate for supports for this? Who is that person? Because it's definitely not me. Like I 100% am on board with everything you said, and we are doing those things, but there's still things happening that don't feel like a behavior analyst should be dealing with them, or I need someone to tell me how a behavior analyst should interact with this client when those things are happening, to like I have a pretty good understanding of trauma-informed care and PTSD and all of those things. So how do we help this person work through that trauma that keeps recurring in our sessions for some unknown reasons? I mean, I think some of them are known, but we can't always prevent those triggers from happening.
Sure. Yeah, well, I just have a couple thoughts. One is that you obviously I would think that a mental health professional, somebody who has, you know, experience dealing with individuals with PTSD and things like that, would be the people to look to, because they at least might have some CBT or ACT or DBT type history and training to be able to do those things. I still think that if you were to do that there'd be no better context to do it than the treatment context that you've developed. And then you could say, now we want you to sit in this space. Furthermore,
I agree.
you know, like being able to now this makes me think, hell yeah, thank goodness that we have some sort of hangout space where if there's something that we can't control, some EO that occurred that's causing a spiral, that at the very least we can say, this looks like it's really tough. So I'm not going to make anything worse for you right now. In fact, I'm just going to sit back and let stuff kind of, you know, happen as they are. So that's, yeah.
Well, this is my client who has a hard time choosing practice. It sounds a lot like what Frank was talking about with CH, right? Like we're spending weeks and weeks working through some of this stuff. And last year we did this too, and then school shut down right when we turned the corner. So now we're restarting, but it's tough because I don't want to mess with the contingencies because there's a lot of safety there. And and the trust is so vital with this person. But we're in hangout a lot.
Yeah, I see. Let me, I guess I'll try to close with this, is that from what I understand, any mental health therapist or licensed psychologist worth their salt would ultimately rely on procedures similar to like exposure therapy to try to overcome this stuff. And there's a ton of reasons why that's really bad, why that's scary. But in another sense, skill-based treatment is exposure therapy. Like all we are doing is presenting the challenging situations and teaching a way to get out of it or teaching a way to adapt to that stuff. So to me, there is a marriage there. And maybe it's that notion that if you can build this, I'm totally speculating here. So I am out of my depth as well. I just want to make that clear so people don't think that I know more than I do, which I don't. I just think that I'm really digging the principles of trauma-informed care that might get the person to a place where they might be willing to at least vocalize some of it. And it sounds like you're saying that the vocalizing is happening. And to me, that's part of, you know, like, I guess part of shared governance is if you can vocalize, maybe if we can get to a point where you're able to tell me what these triggers are, then that somewhere down the line might be something that we can program in a very, very careful way. And Hillary, I super appreciate you saying maybe we shouldn't be the ones doing that. Like secretly, I think behavior analysts should be the ones doing that, but I don't think that we have the training, the expertise, the competency. It's outside of our scope as it currently is.
I agree.
But
I don't think it has to be, but I think it is right now.
Yeah, I will say that with one client I worked with, he had a lot of trauma because he got bullied a lot at school. And so it was the kind of thing where even during ECM, this is that Jeffrey kid, we would not make him talk about his own problem behavior, or we would not, you know, like that was something that parents were like, please don't, I just ask that you don't do that. Like they wanted the goal to be, let's just avoid it. But by the end, they were like, I think he's in a place now where you can maybe bring it up. And that was one of the 2 or 3 times that he chose to hang out. Was I said, I think I want you to start writing about your episode earlier today. And he was like, can I go hang out? And I said, of course. And then he came back, and then we slowly built to it. So it's like a one example where he was willing to put pen to paper and thereby clearly exposing himself to those EOs, the stimuli, the response products of his behavior fed back to him. And then I felt as though something changed about our therapeutic relationship, where he was like, so you're not trying to make me do a problem solving worksheet. You know what I mean? You're not trying to make me tell you how I'll behave differently next time. You're just making me like read it out loud. And then when he was comfortable, we did some role plays about how he could talk to bullies or people that are being rude to him at school. I'm sure that's an unsatisfying answer, but it's
helpful because this learner doesn't have ASD, and I know that you guys did a lot of enhanced choice with non-ASD learners. So it is helpful to talk about because it is like a classical EBD type of situation.
Yeah, I just want to say I appreciate so much that we are not here as a group of behavior analysts talking about how it's attention maintained, whatever these meltdowns are. Do you know what I'm saying? Like that is so, I'm so over that. Us being like, well, even though we don't know the private triggers, like the behavior is all maintained by consequences. That still might be true, but I think it's a little bit more complicated than just saying it's attention or escape or whatever.
Very much, and I really want to hear what Frank has to say.
Yeah. Sorry, Frank.
I agree with you, Dithu. We don't need to stand in the corner staring at ceiling tiles while he melts down because we're putting it on extinction. I don't know why that became that's the extinction pose. It's like staring at the corner ceiling tile. But anyway, Hillary, we did have a situation, and granted this is a sample size of one, right? But in a waiver program that we work in, we develop a treatment plan. They have a certain set of goals, and then when they meet those goals, we're kind of on the hook to transition them into what they consider to be a lower level of service. So what you're describing is similar to a fella, and again, this is a sample size of one. But we didn't do an enhanced choice model. We did just a standard SBT. But and he had experienced a lot of trauma in his past, and we work in conjunction with trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapists. Excuse me. There's a couple in the area. So when we were writing up his transition plan, we kind of included a lot of these goals, kind of what you're talking about, that these things that we wanted to address that we just didn't feel like at the time we were. What I can say is I feel like we got him to a place where he understood kind of what was happening. And we also got him to a place where he could engage in therapy with this particular professional effectively. Maybe that was because he didn't have the autism 299 diagnosis code. So technically that's why they're kind of on the push to like, we'll do this ABA thing for a little bit. We'll see what happens, but it's not really like a recommended therapy for what he has going on. But we were able to get him to a place where he was able to engage in therapy, and he had a fairly good outcome. So I'm not sure if there are trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapists in your area. The one we worked with was really good, and she did great work with him. She worked very well with us, and he's, from what I hear, things have maintained kind of up through his early teenage years now. So
that's so great.
Yeah,
those resources exist, and I am working on getting them for sure. It's just it's tough. It's uphill, to get resources when it all costs money at the end of the day.
I just can't leave without saying though, how great is it that you're asking for who else can help, as opposed to just puffing out your chest and saying, I'm a behavior analyst, I'm gonna do it. Tell me the reinforcer and get out of the way.
Well, thanks. I just want him to be okay.
Yeah, me too. Cool. So on that note,
sorry to bring it down to the low, but
sad, relaxed, and engaged. I can dig it. I'm sorry.
This was amazing. We went well over time. I'm so grateful that we were able to do this, and I'm on cloud 9 right now. This was so awesome. I feel like it's just time to end. I don't know that there's anything else to say other than like a huge round of applause for Dithu for joining us and answering all of our questions.
Thank you all.
Because that was absolutely fantastic. And I can't wait to, all the people who missed out, they really missed out tonight. So
this was really fun. There's a lot more for us to learn. I really appreciated being able to, I'm appreciating being able to think through what's ready for prime time, and maybe what we have questions that we could benefit from answering. But everybody here clearly has safety on the mind, and that's like a really good starting point, I think.
Cool. Well, thanks everybody. If you have questions, shoot them into the group. And also one last thing, if you feel like you can mentor, I'm trying to get some people on the mentorship boat. So reach out to me if you have questions about that. I meant to plug that earlier.
It's not as hard as, it's not that bad.
No, it's great.
That's great.
It's fun.
It's fun. Yeah. You get to be, and we do mentorship hangouts, and maybe we'll invite researchers to join us in our little groups, smaller and some fun things. So So be a mentor if you feel up to it. Shoot me a message if you have questions. And thanks everyone so much for tonight. This was amazing.
This is awesome.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Hillary. Bye,
Thanks,
guys.
Dithu.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.